Hmm? Ah!
Oh God, this is a tragic thing, and sometimes I have a hard time dealing with it and stuff. Please send Heather to heaven and all that.
Dear God, please make sure this never happens to me, because I don't think I can handle suicide. Fast early acceptance into an Ivy League school, and please let it be Harvard. Amen.
Jesus, God in heaven, why'd you have to kill such hot snatch? It's a joke, man. Jeez, people are so serious. Hail Mary, who aren't in heaven, pray for all the sinners so we don't get caught. Another joke, man.
I prayed for the death of Heather Chandler many times, and I felt bad every time I did it, but I kept doing it anyway. Now I know you understood everything. Praise Jesus. Hallelujah.
Hi, I'm sorry. Technically, I did not kill Heather Chandler, but hey, who am I trying to kid, right? I just want my high school to be a nice place. Amen. Did that sound bitchy?
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Still Slaying, a Buffyverse podcast. I'm Penny.
And I'm Kara.
And I'm Jason.
This is a very special episode for our mid-season break. We're going to be discussing the classic 80s dark comedy, Heathers, directed by Michael Lehman and written by Daniel Waters.
Heathers first premiered in the United States at the Sundance Film Festival on January 21st of 1989 before being released nationwide in theaters on March 31st, 1989.
It's also a special episode because we have Jason with us. Hi, Jason.
Yay.
Welcome to Still
Hello.
Slaying.
Glad to finally be on. This is great.
Yeah, Jason is not a Buffy fan from way back, so we haven't been able to have him on the podcast before. But a long time ago, I found out that Jason, although he is a Gen Xer like myself, never saw Heathers, which I found really hard to believe. And so I always wanted to have an opportunity to make him watch it and talk about it. So here we are. Nice.
I'm thankful. It's weird. Like, it's a gap in my movie watching, and I'm not sure. It's always been in the back of my mind. Yeah, I'm going to see that at some point, like probably since 1989. And I just never got. I like Christian Slater. I like Winona Ryder. I was even a fan of 90210 with Shannon Doherty. I like dark comedies. So I'm thankful that you finally got me to get on my butt and watch it.
Awesome.
Roped you in. It is deliciously dark.
It's so dark.
For sure.
So
It is.
you know, I hope that anyone who's listening knows enough about Heathers to know that there's going to be a lot of discussion about a bunch of subjects that could be triggering for some people. If suicide is something that really upsets you, you probably should not listen to this podcast. We're going to be talking about it a lot.
Honestly, all the things.
All the things.
Like almost
it's so
everything
dark.
you could be triggered by at some point is going to be covered most
It's
likely.
all about teen suicide.
Yeah.
Murder, gun violence, date rape.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how relevant all of
Homophobia.
those subjects still are.
Yeah, unfortunately.
25 years later. Or
Yeah.
35 years later? What year is this?
No,
45?
I'm
I mean, how long have humans existed?
It's almost 30, because I was born in 88. This came out
Thousands
in
of
89.
years, right?
Oh my God. I'm so old.
I'm sorry. I was just shy of a year old. I was born April 12th, so I was just under a year old when this came out.
So that answers one question for me, which is, Kara, did you see it when it first came out? I hope not.
I did not. I saw it for the first time because Mean Girls came out when I was a sophomore in high school in 2004.
Perfect
So
timing.
that was very relevant to my life at that point in time. And I remember my mom watching it with me at one point and be like, oh, this is just like that 80s movie's Heather, but just not as intense. Or Heathers. And I was like, what's that? And she goes, oh, you need to watch it. So then I watched it and I was just like, holy hell, this is way more intense than Mean Girls.
That's what I was thinking when I was watching, because I loved Mean Girls with Lindsay Lohan, and I was like, oh, this is like a proto Mean Girls, totally.
Yeah.
Different flavors of some similar messaging.
Yeah, not quite as. I mean, this is even meaner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Darker and darker and darker and more dark. And we already mentioned that Jason had not seen the movie until recently. I, on the other hand, I saw it in the spring of '89. I don't think I saw it in the theater. I remember I rented it, or I had my mom rent it for me when I had the flu. And then she watched it with me, and I was like kind of out of it. And so she fast forwarded through all the scenes that she thought were inappropriate. So it was like
The whole movie?
40-minute movie or something. But because I had the flu, I was like, did I fall asleep and miss something? Or like, and so then I rented it with friends later and was like, oh yeah, I missed a lot of this the first time. And then I loved it so much, and word got out around my group of friends that every time we were having a movie night, I would show up and they'd be like, Penny, we rented Heather's for you. And I'd be like, all right, at this point I've seen it like 15 times. We can stop.
People give me zombie stuff all the time.
Yeah, and you're like, I got it. It's covered. Yeah, exactly. But I have seen it many, many, many times, and then not for like 20 years. And then watching it again, I had forgotten a bunch of stuff, and it was amazing to me how relevant it still is.
Yeah, it really is. It hit hard rewatching, because I don't think I rewatched it maybe once in the last 20 years or so it had been a while, and I kept having to stop myself from taking notes during the first rewatch about it. I'm like, well, that's freakishly relevant today.
Yeah,
this is
so many times.
Not any better, really.
Let's go back to the 80s. See what was happening at the time and what was going on in our culture.
Kara's taking a drink out of her bottle.
Yeah.
Goo goo gaga. Yeah.
I did not know any of the number one songs at the time they were released. I don't think I could really appreciate them less than 1 year old. But the number one song at the time of Heather's release in US theaters was Eternal Flame by the Bangles. And the number one song in the UK was Like a Prayer by Madonna. And I do remember seeing on, like, I think I Love the 80s or something on VH1 back in the day, discussion of, you know, this infamous Pepsi commercial. And I thought it was interesting to note that earlier in the month of March in 1989, Pepsi released a commercial that was featuring the single Like a Prayer, and it actually ended up premiering one day before Madonna officially released the song. And then the commercial got pulled just a month later in early April after boycotts by various religious groups were widely publicized. And Pepsi also ended up pulling a sponsorship for Madonna's Like a Prayer World. I cannot talk today. I'm going to start this and it's over. Pepsi also pulled sponsorship for Madonna's Like a Prayer World Tour, which was then subsequently canceled. I do remember this music video. What was it, like a priest?
There's a church and a...
She was being sexy, right? And
yeah,
it was
with like a black Jesus.
Writhing on the ground, or was that a different one?
And there's like candles everywhere.
Yeah, classic Madonna.
Yeah. I remember this controversy and you know, my friends and I all talking about it and being like, well, then we're going to listen to the song more, you know?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. And I thought it'd be fun to note other popular songs at this time. This one stood out, Girl, You Know It's True by Milli Vanilli. I also remember them from I Love the 80s and their lip syncing
and their whole scandal. Yeah, awesome.
She Drives Me Crazy by Fine Young Cannibals.
One of those guys killed himself.
Really?
Right?
One of the Fine Young Cannibals? That's sad.
No, Milli Vanilli.
Oh, one of the Milli Vanilli.
Because of that whole scandal.
Oh, that's awful.
I know. But it's Heather's, so I figured I'd mention it.
Yeah,
if it
was
another
relevant
movie, maybe I wouldn't have.
Yeah, it's topical.
Funky Cold Medina by Tillamook, which is on my driving playlist currently. Paradise City.
Tone Loc, yeah.
Oh, see... I was born in 1988.
Millennial
I'm
baby.
That card. Paradise City by Guns N' Roses, and You Got It, The Right Stuff by New Kids on the Block. And in the
I can hear all those songs in my head right now.
Me too.
Like at the same time.
Those are good ones.
Yeah.
The right stuff.
It's so good. It just made me want to listen to 80s music. And in the box office, in the U.S. box office at the time for the month of March, when Heathers premiered, number 1 was Fletch Lives with Chevy Chase. 2 was The Rescuers. Is that a Disney movie? Is that right?
It's the one with mice,
Yep.
right?
Animated, yeah. I remember watching that a lot. And number 3, of course, is Rain Man. Other popular movies at that time that were in the theaters were Troop Beverly Hills, which I love, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I just love all of these. The Land Before Time and Dangerous Liaisons.
And I was looking at, because I was like, why did I not watch this? I was a senior in high school, and the movies that were out, because I looked it up too, that I did watch were some of the ones you mentioned: Rain Man, Fletch Lives, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, of course, seen that many times. The Burbs, I think that was with Tom Hanks.
Oh yeah.
Beaches with
Beaches.
Bette
Midler.
Midler, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
The Fly Part 2 with Eric Stoltz, Major League, Pet Cemetery, Say Anything was a big one.
Yeah,
Oh,
classic.
yeah.
And Twins with Arnold and
Love
Danny
Major
DeVito.
League.
I saw all those, so I was going to the movies a lot. It just makes no sense. I never saw Heathers.
Nice.
Yeah,
I
random.
just always wonder how the movie pitch went for Danny DeVito for Twins.
I think
Like,
it
how
was
did they
like
present that?
Schwarzenegger, DeVito. It'll be funny, and they were like,
Yeah.
"Here's some money." Like,
You guys are twins.
yeah, that's it. Here's your money. Go for it. I don't think there was much of a pitch.
Oh man.
In the news leading up to March 31st, 89, on the 24th, the Exxon Valdez tanker spills 10.8 million gallons of crude oil in Prince William Sound near Tatatelec, Alaska. Tatatelec? I don't know. Alaska. It's a bad month for Exxon and the environment because earlier in the same month, the Exxon tanker Houston runs aground in Hawaii and spills 117,000 gallons of oil.
Yikes.
Yeah, that was a huge scandal that just dominated the news the rest of 1989.
Yeah.
On March 28th in 89, the Louvre Pyramid, designed by I.M. Pei, is inaugurated by French President Francois Mitterrand in Paris, which is amazing because I have been to the Louvre before the pyramid and since the pyramid and remember the difference, but most people, I think, don't really remember pre-pyramid.
Nope.
I don't.
Yeah. And on March 29th, 1989, the 61st Academy Awards were held, and Rain Man had a very good night, winning Best Picture, Best Actor for Dustin Hoffman, and Best Director for Barry Levinson. Jodie Foster also won her first Oscar that night for Best Actress for her performance in The Accused, which, for anybody who hasn't seen The Accused, it is an amazing film, and it...
Also dark.
Yes, very dark, but not funny dark, just dark. And
Nope, not funny.
important. And one of the first films that had a realistic depiction of rape, and I think the first film that had any kind of realism about rape prosecution and what the aftermath is like. And I think it should be required viewing along with the Netflix miniseries Unbelievable. Those two together will educate most people of what they really need to know about rape and how it's handled by our legal system in this country.
So earlier in the month of March 1989, on March 3rd, 1989, Robert McFarlane gets 2 years probation with a $20,000 fine for pleading guilty to withholding information from Congress in the Iran-Contra illegal arms for hostages affair. On March 13th, 1989, the 27th Space Shuttle Discovery 8 launched, and for the first time in NASA's history, a woman performed the countdown to launch.
Oh, how far we've come. Okay.
Also, on March 13th, Tim Berners-Lee invents the World Wide Web as a way of sharing information between computers. Too bad that never went anywhere. He did that on a Next computer, by the way. That was Steve Jobs' company after he got kicked out of Apple. So the web was invented on that. On March 20th, 1989, Major League Baseball announces that Pete Rose, who was the manager for the Cincinnati Reds at the time, was officially under investigation for his gambling.
That was
specifically on baseball.
Huge news at the time. Everybody was talking about it. And I remember being like, why do we care? Because I just never cared about baseball.
Yeah.
I threw this one in there because that was something that is like still seared in my brain because of, you know, my dad growing up and then watching anything I could get my hands on about baseball growing up. It feels like I was there. I was not, but it feels like it.
So funny.
So my life is like really busy right now. It's been busier since I had kids, and I think a lot of people have busy lives right now. It's good, but it's busy, and Jenny works a lot, and so I'm like making breakfast, giving rides, cooking meals, helping with homework, all that. I'm podcasting a lot. That takes a lot of prep with research and taking notes and organizing my thoughts. I don't know. I think, how long does it take you to get ready for a podcast about?
It depends on the length of whatever we're discussing. So, you know, preparing for this one, for Heather's, I watched the movie through once, and then I watched it through a second time, pausing several times. So that's like 3 hours, 3.5 hours.
And taking notes, right?
Yeah.
And
sometimes if I can, I watch something a third or fourth time. It just depends on how much time I have.
Yeah. With Fear, I only watched it once ever on fast speed.
Yeah. I mean,
later on. But
you don't need to hurt yourself.
But it's when you get to the part where you're taking notes and organizing it, it takes focus. And I've noticed that like I have lack of sleep because of the kids and everything. I depend on coffee so much to help get me through.
Oh yeah, me too.
And I still feel really tired a lot and kind of unfocused. And so I've been trying this stuff called Magic Mind. It's a mental performance shot that you drink every day. And I wasn't so sure if I was going to like it, but even after the first couple of days, I didn't really notice much. But then I started to look forward every morning. Oh, it's time to take my little drink, you know? And I was feeling like in a better mood, a little more like a pick-me-up, pleasant, a little more awake, more aware and focused, and not so jittery. I mean, I still drink coffee, but not as much when I'm trying this. So,
what's it called again?
It's called Magic Mind.
Magic Mind.
It's the world's first mental performance shot. It's great for being more efficient, alert, and focused, things like that. Apparently it has over 100% of vitamin C and D per bottle. It's just a little shot. I'm making a thing that no one can see, but with my fingers here, but
2 ounces.
Yeah, I think it's something like that, maybe a little more. It has time released caffeine, so that helps with, so you don't feel a crash like you do normally with caffeine. It has herbs that give you like stress reduction and calm. That was another thing I noticed. Calmness. And I liked it. So I looked, they sent me some information about it. It was created with the Scientific Advisory Board of Doctors and Medical Researchers in development for over 10 years with hundreds of iterations. So it seems like the real deal.
Been through some testing.
It has mushrooms organically grown in California. They use the fruiting body, which they say has the highest density of bioactive compounds. They use cognizin citicoline, which is the best proprietary form of citicoline and normally has a 2-year wait list for customers. There's all kinds of details like this on the website if you're curious. But if you're like me, you feel a bit run down and unfocused at times, and you want to feel calm, alert, focused, I recommend checking this out. You can get it at magicmind.com/podcastica. And if you use the code podcastica20, you get up to 56% off your first subscription, or 20% off if you just do a one-time purchase. So that's podcastica20 for 56% off. If you're already a subscriber of Magic Mind, you can still use that code and you could save on your next subscription payment, which is kind of nice. They often just have these deals for
usually
first
you only
time.
Get one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're curious but you're not sure, one great thing is they have a 100% money back guarantee, no questions asked, so there's no risk. I love that. If you don't like it, they'll refund you in 3 to 4 hours, they say. So, but I think they like
that's
it.
fast.
So again, that's magicmind.com/podcastica with code podcastica20 for up to 56% off a subscription. Thank you to Magic Mind.
So let's get into the film. Because Jason is our guest, we start with Jason. And what topic would you like to start us off with, Jason?
It reminded me of a lot of things that have come out since, which I think probably may have been, at least in part, inspired by Heathers, you know. Mean Girls we mentioned, the popular girls clique being asses to everyone else. I thought Veronica, you know, Winona Ryder's character was kind of like Lindsay Lohan's character in Mean Girls, where she was a part of the clique but kind of disapproving at the same time. I think we could have reviewed this movie on our Yellow Jackets WTF podcast too, because Jackie is a total Heather.
She is a Heather.
So much so.
And also, if you've heard us, if you haven't watched that show, I highly recommend it. I think if you're into Buffy, you might be into that. I don't know, but
and if you're into Heathers, honestly,
and Heathers, yeah. But I always say Yellow Jackets is a black comedy or a dark comedy, and Heathers even more so. Both are, I would say, heightened, not like the grounded real world. Probably Heathers even more, but Yellow Jackets too. And
I feel like Shauna is definitely a Veronica with her journaling and her sort of pretensions of being literary and smarter than everyone else. And, you know, she's best friends with a Heather.
Secretly hating her friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Breakfast Club I thought of a lot watching this.
Yes.
Because there's all the cliques, you know. The jocks in Heathers reminded me of Emilio Estevez. The Heathers themselves are kind of Molly Ringwalds. The nerds with glasses, they aren't in Heathers very much, but they are there. They're Anthony Michael Hall. Molly Ringwald's character, she's also a bit Veronica too, because once you get to know her, she's kind of upset about the pressures of being popular. Oh, poor thing.
It's true. She starts off as a Heather and evolves in our eyes to a Veronica,
which is what's great about Breakfast Club, in my opinion. So JD, you know, Christian Slater's character, it's a bit of a bait and switch with him. I would say they want you to think of him one way, which I'm sure we'll get into, but then he turns into something else. But before he reveals himself to be a total psycho, I'd say he's more like a John Cusack, cerebral, sensitive, quirky type, you know, a bit 90210 Luke Perry.
Yeah.
Brooding, deep thinking outsider.
The safe bad boy at first.
Yeah, at first. And I don't think Breakfast Club really had a type for him, but in the end, maybe Judd Nelson, this aggressive, dangerous wastoid, and maybe a little Ali Sheedy. She was a little psycho.
Yeah.
The basket case.
Yeah. And also
the basket case.
The long trench coat that JD wears.
Yeah.
Didn't Judd Nelson's character have a long coat like that? I think that's very intentional.
I loved Bender.
Yeah.
I had a little crush on him, and I don't know what that says about me.
Who didn't?
I know, but I was like 10, and I was like, that one.
Yeah.
That guy. Not
I
Emilio
wonder, we
Estevez.
should poll women, because this might just be why you two are friends. Cause
We both like a bad boy, that's for sure. I have not gotten over it yet. It's been 40 years, and
it's not going to change, I don't think.
At least I'm cognizant of it now.
Yeah.
Like,
that's good.
It doesn't stop me from going out with them, though.
Well, I mean, Molly Ringwald did.
Yeah.
Spoilers. But the only other thing is Christian Slater. I should have looked it up. It felt like he was destined to be the next Jack Nicholson. He seemed like a young Jack Nicholson, and then he kind of fell off the map, right? I mean, I think he's been in things, but
he's had more of a.
It feels like unrealized potential there.
He's had more of a TV career lately, but he was hot at the end of the 80s. He was, Pump Up the Volume, Gleaming the Cube, Heathers, and then remember in the Buffy movie. There was this line where she said, I just want to grow old, marry Christian Slater, and die, which is a paraphrase of a line Winona Ryder has in this movie where she's like, why don't we just, grow old, something, something, and die? And I was like, oh, that's a direct callback from the Buffy movie to this movie.
Well, it's even in Clueless, which came out in 1995, like they're still referencing Christian Slater and him being a babe and going to see the new Christian Slater film. So, he carried on and was relevant for a couple of mini generations of teenage girls for sure.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you mention Jack Nicholson, and this is part of our trivia later, but it seems like a good time to bring up that Christian Slater was intentionally channeling Jack Nicholson in his performance for Heathers, and he kind of modeled his mannerisms and his voice after Jack Nicholson specifically. And once you know that, I mean, even before you know it, you can pick up on it, but knowing that and then watching it, I was just like, holy hell, like this is all Jack Nicholson almost shining like. And I think I read somewhere that he even sent a copy or something to Jack Nicholson and asked him to watch it and then never heard back.
Which is so Jack Nicholson.
Like,
to be like, who is this kid? I never heard of him. It's like classic Jack Nicholson.
It's so funny.
Yeah, the film has had really lasting impact. There is also in our trivia later, but we might as well talk about it now. The writer, Daniel Waters, instead of trying to learn teen slang that really existed, he was worried that would get dated very quickly. So he just made up his whole own vocabulary of slang, and then that became teen slang. I remember everybody saying, what's your damage? Fuck me gently with a chainsaw. Like, how very, all those things.
I got a motor.
Yeah, I got a motor. All those things made their way into everyday conversation. And I've heard people say it and I'll be like, haha, Heathers. And they're like, what? They don't even know where they got it from. It
just became part of the lexicon.
This is a total tangent, but the first person to ever say awesome was Jeff Spicoli in Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Is that true?
I believe it.
Played by
Sean Penn.
What's the guy's name? Sean Penn.
Sean Penn.
As far as I know, maybe there was a subculture of people saying that, but no one I ever heard ever said that. And I remember when that movie came out, it was so funny to hear someone say awesome, and now every single person on the planet says it.
Well, and Waters talked about, we'll just remove this from the trivia section now, but Waters talked about how, commonly writers, executive producers, anybody in Hollywood that was putting together a teen film, what they would typically do is go, sit in a cafeteria in different high schools and take notes and listen to what all the teens were saying. And that's why he was like, I don't want to do that because then it'll be outdated by the time that it comes out. So he seemed to be one of the first ones to really have that idea to come up with his own. And it's, it happens later in Clueless. That is another one that, they came up with their own slang that caught on, like the as if and all sorts of stuff. And even in Mean Girls, the idea of fetch, trying to make fetch happen.
Trying to make fetch happen.
It reminded me of the How Very and Heathers. Yeah. And fun fact, the director of Mean Girls, Mark Waters, is the younger brother of Daniel Waters.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
And that fascinating. I was just like, oh my gosh, these movies are more connected than I thought.
That is fantastic.
So my first point that I kind of titled and put together was what I put the anti-John Hughes and how society viewed teens. And, you mentioned the Breakfast Club, and what I kind of took away with, I was obsessed with John Hughes movies when I was growing up, especially maybe 10 to 13, 14 or so, the Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, and Pretty in Pink especially. And what strikes me about Heathers is how it seems to play on our expectations, especially at the time in the late 80s, of how typical teen movies would end and almost the formula that they follow. And how, all of John Hughes movies, there's some, big kiss or something. I think of Jake and Samantha at the end of 16 Candles kissing over her birthday cake. And in this movie, you know, we get Winona Ryder standing there smoking a cigarette covered in soot after her ex-boyfriend has just blown himself up in front of her. And the idea in John Hughes movies seems to really focus on the fact that teenagers are just so misunderstood. And there's always this deeper, you know, meaning. There's more to them. There's more going on in their lives than their stereotype. Like in The Breakfast Club, you know, you've got the brain and the athlete and the basket case and the princess and the criminal. And throughout that movie, you find out that they're not, you know, just those things. They are more than their stereotypes. And that happens in 16 Candles, and I think of Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Ferris Bueller. All of those have these kind of, you know, these kids all have depth, and they're portrayed to have depth. In this movie, what I think is brilliant about Heathers is they kind of play on our need and tendency as a society to find deeper meanings in things. And all of these teens who are thought to have committed suicide but haven't are, you know, almost reborn in their suicide. And they weren't misunderstood in any way. Like, Heather was really just mean and shallow and awful. And Kurt and Ram, these two, like, meathead football players, were bullies and
homophobes,
like, sexually predatory and homophobic and dumb. They're not misunderstood, but in Death, then Heather all of a sudden becomes, you know, she has this depth to her. And I love, there's so many good lines in this movie, but the fact that the faculty is sitting around after Heather number one's suicide, and it's like, I'm impressed she made proper use of the word myriad in her suicide note. And Veronica has that line where, you know, she said suicide gave Heather depth, Kurt a soul, and Ram a brain, kind of playing off the Wizard of Oz. Mm-hmm. And I just loved that it kind of winks at us. And it's like, they're not misunderstood. Like, they were all mean and shallow and dumb. And JD seems to be the only person in the movie that really seems to understand this and be able to manipulate it and call it out. Because he knows as soon as he writes that suicide note for Heather, he knows people are gonna eat it up, and explains, you know, all this stuff to Veronica. She's like, well, she, you know, got the word myriad wrong on her vocab test last week or whatever. He was like, even more perfect. Yeah. And he is just kind of our little psycho bad boy calling things out. But that's the one thing that I really enjoyed about this movie, to summarize, how it kind of subverts what we typically see in teen comedies and teen films. And I feel like it has a bigger message and commentary overall about society, as opposed to some other teen movies where the focus really does seem to be the social structure of high schools.
That sort of leads into something I wanted to talk about, which was, these days we call it like toxic positivity. And throughout the movie, the adults are talking about the, you know, the teen suicide phenomenon, or troubled teenagers, or our troubled youth. There's even that magazine that's like, you know, the troubled teenagers of our society. But they're not actually doing anything about it, right? There's a lot of lip service. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of exploitation, right? Pauline Fleming is like, oh, I'm going to get on TV and I'm going to show everyone that I'm the one who feels it. And she's like so excited to have the suicide note to pass around in class. And you know, ridiculous. Everybody wants to get on TV talking about how they were friends with Heather before she died. And it's this, everyone's giving lip service to, you know, teenage suicide. There's even this really shallow and very unsubtle song, Teenage Suicide, Don't Do It, by the group Big Fun.
Yeah.
But nobody's actually talking to the kids about why they might be having a hard time. Nobody's actually like sitting down one-on-one with them and talking to them about what's going on with them. Veronica's parents, JD goes to the house and is like, I think Veronica's going to kill herself. And they're just talking to each other about it. Veronica leaves the room and they're like, oh, she left.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, well.
and it just reminds me so much of current times when everybody says things like, well, go to therapy. And then they're done. They're done with you. They told you to go to therapy, which, by the way, is easier said than done. Most people can't afford it. There aren't enough therapists to go around. If you live in a rural area, good luck finding one even within 100 miles. But anyway, and then there's also this like, oh, you know, good vibes only. And I just want to stay positive. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten that advice from friends, teachers, coworkers, HR people, doctors, family members. Like, I've struggled with depression off and on my whole life. And the number of people who have said to me, like, just focus on the positive. And then they have this look about them like, I helped. I helped Penny. I told her what to do, and now it's solved. And it's like, no, you didn't. You're just like a throw pillow. Like, you're like a saying on the side of a mug. That's not actually doing anything. And in this film, I mean, it was the whole point JD was trying to make at the end by killing everyone in the high school, which let's all agree is extreme, was to make people actually pay attention to the fact that teenagers are having a hard time. And it all stems, of course, from the fact that his mother killed herself. And he says at one point that he's crazy because nobody loves him. And he's got this horrible father who is a weirdo. And let's talk about him.
He's so weird.
Who is also not paying any attention to his son, who he should very well know is struggling with mental health issues. Instead, he just moves him around all the time and ignores the fact that his kid has guns and access to explosives.
Well, isn't he a psychopath too? That was one of my questions.
It's hard to know.
Because didn't he sort of suggest that he that he intentionally left someone in the basement of a building that he was about to demolish? Or did I catch that wrong?
He made that joke, essentially.
I didn't think he thought that there was a person in the basement. He said a Norwegian. I thought that was the name of an explosive. Like he was referring to a type of explosive.
I thought he was talking about an actual
Norwegian person.
I thought he was talking about a person.
Yeah. I thought it was like a type of explosive device. But he is certainly callous and
creepy.
Violent and, you know, uncaring. I mean, the way he talked about people wanting to save historic landmarks and the tree and everything. And
it's like, we got rid of the bitches.
He's pro-violence.
Like, all right,
and
man.
He loves blowing things up. And, like, is it a big surprise that his son then wants to blow things up? I mean, you grow up in a world where you have your mother has killed herself and your father is literally a force of destruction. Like, what choice do you have except to be mentally unstable the way JD is?
Well, and it's funny because in this movie, which seems to have this major, theme and string throughout of these teenagers not being misunderstood, it also shows us how frequently teenagers are misunderstood. And even today, there's this common, tendency in society for people to blame society, like amorphously in the entertainment industry, on teen problems, like, violent video games. And even the preacher at one point in that
I have it.
scene is like, I
blame not heaven, but rather a society that tells its youth that the answers can be found in the MTV video games. We must pray that the other teenagers of Sherwood, Ohio, know the name of that righteous dude who can solve their problems. It's Jesus Christ, and he's in the book.
Ferris Bueller. No.
But he also does nothing. Does he say...
Those damn MTV video games.
Does he say, so I hope
they
that
never act
other
on it.
teenagers will come to me and I'll counsel them. Like, I have office hours on Thursday afternoons. Like, stop by and we can talk about whatever's bothering you and it's confidential. No. Look it up in a book.
It reminds
Go
me
find
of
Jesus.
And we did talk about how this episode should just have one massive trigger warning, but it reminds me of this response to, the uptick of school shootings and violence, especially among teenagers in the United States, and how, I don't know how many times I've heard people, it used to be those violent video games are responsible for this, and these movies and TV shows that are so violent have desensitized us, and that's what's making them do this. And now today we hear it more framed as it's a mental health issue, and that's great, but we never do anything. Society never does anything to actually directly address it. It's almost as if teenagers are viewed as, freaks of nature or some mystery when they're younger. And JD definitely picks up on that. And Veronica does too, because the issue really isn't the fact that teens are some separate entity, some unknowable entity. It's that they're kind of imitating adults and adult society, and the problems carry over. And I love the fact that, when they're young, it's like this focus on social status and the social hierarchy. And then once they're out of that, the focus becomes your career, your wealth, what car do you drive, how many material things do you have. It's not a coincidence that they're playing croquet throughout the movie, or that Veronica's parents are always talking about pate.
Yeah, Veronica clearly comes from wealth. Her parents have money. That's a big fancy house that she lives in. And the other characters seem to have a fair amount of money as well, right? Like Heather, both of the Heather's houses that we saw are pretty fancy. And, JD's dad is like some big construction, demolition, mogul. And they have fancy stuff, although not unpacked, in their house, which I think is really hilarious. Having been a kid who moved around a lot, I'm like, yeah, I remember that. We had a lot of boxes that were like, no, that'll be at the next house. Like, we just don't open that in this house. That'll be for the next house. I think one thing that all the wealth accomplishes is to remove the ability to blame mental health problems and teenage suicide and teenage problems on poverty, single parent households, being people of color. They also don't have any actually LGBTQ characters, right? These are all straight, white, wealthy kids who apparently come from, undivorced parents, and they still are all like twisted and messed up.
It's like good old Midwestern stuff.
Yeah.
One of the Heathers' parents got divorced, but yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
Wait, which Heather had divorced parents?
They reference
McNamara. I'd be willing to go a whole day on a cheerleader.
She didn't make the cheerleader squad either.
Oh my gosh.
It's so cynical and uncaring, the way that principal was like, was this Heather the cheerleader? No? Okay. Well, I don't want to close school for just any kid.
I know. Come on, man. That whole faculty meeting, each of them, wild.
Yeah, they're all horrible in their own special way.
Hilarious. But also...
So, Kara, your thing about how the kids actually weren't misunderstood kind of leads into my next point, which is... this is a very misanthropic movie.
Oh, yeah.
The people are all selfish, and their inner monologues are hilarious when they're praying at the funeral, just like, please don't let this impact my college enrollment or whatever, I prayed for her death many times. God, you heard me.
Thank you. I'm
Hallelujah.
Good, right?
But I think, so honestly, this is my first time watching this movie. About maybe up to 2/3 of the way through, I was feeling very disturbed by it. And I was, one of the movies that pissed me off the most ever was Natural Born Killers with Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis, because I thought it glorified the killing of innocents. And I felt like, even though this is a black comedy, that's where it was going. I thought that they're painting all these characters as just despicable, basically, right? Like you said, they're not misunderstood. They're actually shit. And, and so that we would identify with this guy who wanted to kill them all. And I thought sort of Veronica was in that same position as us, where at first she's thinking this is really dark, this is bad, but over time they wanted her and us to be like, okay, yes, I get it, you should be killing all these kids because they're awful. And I thought that's where they were going with her character too. I thought she was going to resist at first, but then she was going to end up reveling in it. And I thought, if that happens, I'm not gonna like this movie. So I was so glad that at the end she resisted and turned against it, and she wanted to, hang out with Martha. And I thought that was a little bit of John Hughes' heart at the end there, and it was sort of a moral message of don't worry about what the popular crowd that looks down on you, just do your own thing. And you don't think so? I mean, I feel like those two readings of this movie don't necessarily coincide, So maybe I'm just wanting it to make it into something that's more palatable to me.
I get the same thing from it, Jason, but I think they don't clash. I think those two readings, because not all teens are the same, and some of them are shallow and shitty, and some of them have depth, and you won't know which one is which until they get the fuck out of high school.
Yeah.
Well,
and also to get the movie to work, because it does start out that way. You do need the characters and it's a comedy. It's a black comedy, so they're not meant to be like, oh, maybe there's something in there. No, they're douchebags. The jocks are total.
Yeah, they have no redeeming
assholes.
Qualities whatsoever.
Yeah. But there is I think it's really Veronica's journey, in my opinion, and it's her struggle with whether to be a Heather, whether to be a psycho killer, or whether to be a good person. And she decides to be a good person at the end, and that felt so good. I felt like this movie has something in common with Karate Kid, which is in Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi is this wise old guru who preaches nonviolence. He says, you train to fight so you won't have to fight. But the cathartic moment in the movie is when Daniel kicks the shit out of Johnny, kicks him in the face.
Yeah,
right?
that is fantastic.
So you get the moral message, but you get the satisfaction of that fucking bam. And so you kind of like you want to have your cake and eat it too. I feel like this Heathers is sort of like that too, because if you're like most of us, you weren't the popular kid in high school. You got looked down upon in one way or another. And so there's a part of, I suspect a lot of people who like this movie, they're like, yeah, fuck those guys. You get to see the revenge fantasy play out, but then you get the moral ending where she rises above it all, which I love.
But she doesn't just, it's more complicated than just that she decides to stop JD and to be a better person. She decides, she figures out that if you cut off the head, another head will take its place, right? She killed Heather Chandler, and Heather Duke just popped right in there and just took over all the bitchiness. So she was like, not only do I need to stop Heather Duke, I need to fill that void with somebody who won't abuse everyone. So she takes charge.
Basically, it's like the presidency of the United States.
Yeah. It's a powerful position, and somebody needs to be in it who's going to be aware of the power and use it responsibly. Now, she is an actual murderer, so, who knows what the future holds for Veronica.
She only killed one person intentionally. She didn't know about the poison with the first Heather. The two guys, she thought the guns were tranks. Once she realized that, this isn't a trank, then she killed the second guy who was running away, right? So, but she was in a panic. So, still, she did kill him. And that was it. Just that one guy. Like, after that, nobody else. Man. She tried to kill...
she shot JD a bunch.
Yeah.
But that was, self-preservation and trying to save all the students.
This movie is not great about realistic
effects
of anyway, I want to talk about that later. But in response to, what you had mentioned, Jason, about how it does end up kind of giving some hope at the end. I don't know if this is the English major in me and I'm just overanalyzing it, but in some ways I see, the message and outcome of this movie as being both more cynical and more hopeful than the typical John Hughes movies. And what I mean by that is, in John Hughes films, you've always got, somebody who maybe is not one of the popular kids, or, in The Breakfast Club, you have all these stereotypes that come together and gain a new understanding from each other. Or, in 16 Candles, it's almost like you witness someone who was, in a certain space on that social hierarchy move up a rung and become more accepted. And the social hierarchy is still in existence and acknowledged, but you have these characters saying, oh, okay, well, I recognize that, not every brain is just a brain, or not every princess is just a princess. So you get more in-depth understanding of them, but it almost seems to still kind of respect that social hierarchy, where I see Heather's as basically, it is more nihilistic. I see it as the conclusion is essentially that there isn't really a profound takeaway from your high school experiences and this hierarchy, other than the fact of once you realize that it is complete nonsense and shouldn't really matter. And at the end of the film, there is hope, because Veronica, basically walks through the school covered in soot, and you see this hope of a better society, and her maybe dismantling it because she sees Heather Duke and she takes the red scrunchie right out of her hair, puts it in her own hair, and says, there's a new sheriff in town. And one thing that I think, you mentioned this too, that is very intentional and important is the fact that we see her go up to Martha at the end instead of her childhood friend, Betty. And I think part of the reasoning for that is Martha seems to be one of the only other, if not the only other character in that movie who sees this, social hierarchy and acknowledges it for how harmful it is and suffers harm from it. They all do, but I think it's noteworthy that she is the only one that actually tries to kill herself. We see her going through pain and suffering, whereas Betty, the childhood friend, fully buys into the social hierarchy. When Veronica and Heather number 1 approach her in the cafeteria, she's almost bashful when she's talking to her and like pulling out photos of them at Halloween, and she's kind of reverent. And even when she's at Veronica's house playing croquet, she says, I'm not as cool as your other friends. And when the Heathers show up, the remaining Heathers, she immediately kind of quote unquote recognizes her place and leaves. Whereas Martha, like, we see them do really cruel crap to her at the beginning of the movie, and the alliance between them, the fact that Veronica and Martha kind of almost walk off into the sunset together, where they're ignoring the convention of prom and they're just gonna watch movies and eat popcorn, is them recognizing the nonsensical nature of high school hierarchies. Whereas in a John Hughes movie, I think they would be going to prom together. At the end of Mean Girls, the crown is broken up when Caddy wins prom queen, and they all kind of come together. So I feel like it's, I don't know. Like I said, I could be overanalyzing it, but I see it as kind of a cynical hope, maybe.
I think Martha does admire the social structure or the people in it, because when she gets that fake note from one of the jocks, she goes over there. Now, maybe it was just to say, what the fuck is this? But it seemed more like, did you really write this for me? And they laughed at her, which was really sad.
The look on her face seemed,
crushed, hopeful. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, hopeful and crushed. And then I also got the idea that one of the reasons why she decided to commit suicide is because suicide was starting to look so attractive, because people would get revered and turned into this great person afterwards, and she wanted that for herself. So that is also sort of longing for some kind of acknowledgement, referral, approval, and
validation.
Things like that.
Yeah.
But but even like I was thinking about The Breakfast Club, like that. Why I love that movie so much is that that these people who are seen as stereotypes are forced to spend a day together, and then they end up getting to know each other and sees each other in more complexity, right? And they connect. But another thing I loved about it is at the end they realize, we're not going to be friends after this.
Yeah.
They acknowledge.
And maybe a couple of them will, but I like that acknowledgement, so it didn't seem too like rose-colored glasses like you guys were saying earlier.
Well, and they do have that common enemy in The Breakfast Club with what's his name?
Yeah,
Paul
Principal Dick Wad. But I don't totally understand what you're saying about the cynical part here. You're saying that the structure still matters, or
I think that in direct comparison with John Hughes films, the happy ending is like, the quote unquote geek ending up with the popular girl or guy, or, they always end up respecting and still acknowledging the structure.
The reward is
and the
getting
social
accepted
structure.
into the popular clique, not destroying the concept of a popular clique.
See, I don't see. So you're saying like they're just kind of blowing it all up, right? Which I don't see as cynical.
I
think
see it
that's
as
even less cynical.
Right, that's what I mean. I feel like it's simultaneously more cynical and more hopeful.
Yeah, well,
like,
see here, like I always think
is powerful in that final
exactly. And I always think
real power.
what I learned getting older is when you have a strong opinion about something and you stand firm in it, even in the face of scoffing or whatever. Like in our Zedhead group, I will always stand up for what are those Halloween candies that everyone hates?
Oh, candy corns.
Candy
yeah,
corn.
you do always
Candy
defend
corn.
those.
Candy corn, and that's partly because of this principle, because everyone wants to bully me because of it, and I'm like, nope, I don't care. I'm not going to submit to your idea of what's right and wrong, because I'm standing firm in my own beliefs, and I've learned that when you do that, even if people don't agree with you, they'll respect you for it. Not so much for the candy corn thing, but I'm going to keep pushing.
People do.
But anyway,
You know what I mean? Respect it,
so,
but there's a very uncomfortable period before they respect it. And most people don't make it through that. And kids
can't push, especially kids, right? And that's why people are afraid to stand out in middle school, especially, and also high school. So that's why I thought with her, Veronica, at the end, she's like, I love candy corn, and fuck anyone who gives me shit
She
about
sought
it.
out Martha because Martha was at the bottom of the pecking order at that high school, and she was like, screw the pecking order.
Yeah, it was a statement.
She wanted everyone to know, like, I'm the queen and I'm hanging out with Martha.
Yeah, I think the key is in John Hughes movies, it's frequently, being accepted or at least understood within the social hierarchy and social structures, whereas at the end of Heather's, it's about utterly subverting the social hierarchy and social structures. And I mean, I say sit up because she did watch her ex-boyfriend blow himself up. Like, instead of a kiss over a birthday cake with candles, she is smoking a cigarette.
But the explosion
very
lit.
Satisfied after.
My favorite little detail.
She was forged in that fire.
that she just like takes the cigarette out and puts it in her mouth, and she clearly is like, I'm gonna light this off of your explosion, and he's like, I accept that. I respect it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that to me, it felt like that's what gave her the strength to say, you know what, fuck all this. I could have just died. I just went through something. Life is too short to worry about this shit,
Also, the
definitely a
experience
trauma
of watching people mourn, insincerely for the people that she killed. It changes her on a fundamental level. After Heather Chandler's funeral, when she and JD are watching TV and everybody's like talking about how much they loved Heather and how great she was and everything on TV, and Veronica's like yelling back at the TV screen. And then after Kurt and Ram's funeral, she's kind of laughing with JD about, the I love my dead gay son thing, and then sees that little girl who's crying, and it has this huge effect on her where she's like, we killed actual people. Those are people.
Yes.
And I love that.
Life.
That shifts between in her relationship and her perspective, because like I said, I thought it was going to be another Natural Born Killers where she, well, I think they were always just evil from the beginning. But anyway, where she got sucked into it with him. But then she started to second guess herself. But I love there was a little bit of back and forth there where it still seemed like there was a part of her that was tempted to play into this whole vengeance thing. Like when she told, like he was like grabbing the knife to kill the next Heather. And she's totally thinks he's a psycho by this point, has broken up with him, doesn't want anything to do with it. But then she's like, Heather would never kill herself with that knife. So it's like she's still giving him advice, you know? So there's just that period in there where she was like kind of on the fence,
that was in her dream. And I think it was her fear that she was going to go down that path and be just as bad and messed up as JD.
Yeah.
That dream sequence is amazing because you think it's really happening right up until that, like right after that moment. And then you get that crazy funeral.
When it zooms out at the church.
And you get everybody with the 3D glasses on and, you know, the minister who's like all decked out and like clearly enjoying the attention. And then Heather Chandler shows up in that Beetlejuicy outfit with her hair all done up. And I love that scene so much. When she's like, oh, the afterlife is so boring. I'm like, oh my God.
Because Veronica, who is not a Heather, is intrigued by JD. Like, you know, you talk about that back and forth where she recognizes he's a psychopath. Like when she realizes in that scene when, you know, she misses, does she shoot Kurt?
Yeah,
Right, she misses Kurt, and JD shoots Ram right in the throat. And you can see on her face when she has the realization that the bullets are real. And he is actually, you know, shooting to kill. And she kind of freaks out a little bit. But then when they run away from the scene and go back into the car and, you know, take their clothes off and start making out because they don't want the cops to think they were doing anything shady being in the woods. At first, she like is pulling away and looking back at the cop to see what he's doing, if he's still there. And then you can kind of see her get fully into the kiss.
And she's still with him after that. She doesn't break away until he's planning to kill more people after those two guys.
Well, and that's kind of related to a mini point that I had with, you know, obviously Penny and I are talking about being intrigued by the bad boys, and obviously in Heather's, JD is this bad boy that is kind of mysterious, sitting off by himself at the cafeteria alone, and he's got this great hair and he's making flirty eyes with Veronica, and pretty quickly you see that he is a bad boy that is taken to almost a like grotesque psychotic extreme.
He's Charles Manson.
He really is. Like, he is psychopathic, sociopathic. Like, it is scary, but I think it's a good commentary about how, in general, bad boys are often romanticized. And a step further, you know, this teenage, like, forbidden romance, he is also frequently romanticized, right? Like, he's kind of presenting this almost appealing Bonnie and Clyde coupley like aspect to Veronica, and that is something, you know, either Bad Boys or this, you know, pull of this kind of epic forbidden romance where it's either you against society or, you know, you're meant to be together but there's something pulling you apart, is also romanticized frequently. And I think back to, you know, Tristan and Isolde and Romeo and Juliet, and even with, you know, Buffy, there's Buffy and Angel and all the vampire things with Edward and Bella and Twilight. There's this danger where they could kill you,
but they're sexy.
And they're designed to kill you, but they're sexy, and it's this forbidden romance. And even to a lesser extent, you see it in, you know, society somehow forbids you from being together, like Cordelia and Xander on Buffy, or Samantha and Jake in 16 Candles.
Right, like if you're not from the same social class, you shouldn't be together.
Yeah.
If you're not from the same species, you shouldn't be together.
Shouldn't be together.
And there is a romantic trope of young girls. It's always young girls, right? It never happens to women in their 30s. It's always like teenagers who fall for these dark, brooding, moody, troubled bad boys who wear very stylish clothes and have beautiful hair always. And there's, in some stories, she saves him, and in some stories, he corrupts her. And neither of those things happens here.
On Gilmore Girls. Yep. She
and when
sees
you get to
through
the
his toxicity ultimately.
She does, but it seemed like, you know, once you figure out that he's just a psycho killer. But if she would have aligned herself with him, I'm sure there would have been a lot of people who would have loved that because because he's so hot, right? And it's great. And but until when he said, because she faked her own hanging. And he's talking to himself and saying, I came up here to kill you. I would bet that there were a lot of women and girls watching and like, what?
Yeah.
You betrayed. Like that was the biggest injury of the whole movie.
Yeah,
and exactly.
In his,
because I even felt that way a little bit.
I was like, kill her. He's like, I love you. I mean, I was going to kill you, but I love you. And
Christian Slater has that effect.
And so at that point, it's like, because there's even a little part of me that can identify with that. Like, what I thought, even though you're such a psycho, I thought at least you cared about her and it was you and her against the world.
We're so used to that.
And so then it's like, fuck you, fully.
It really subverts the trope because she falls out of love with him. Even at the end, she's not like, I love you, but you have to stop, or I love you, I can help you. She's like, you need to be put down.
I can fix you.
Right? And she's like, I'm going to watch you blow up. That's fine with me. And
well, she points that gun at him at the end, and she's like, you know what I want, babe? Cool guys like you out of my life. And I was like, that says so much.
It's empowering.
About this trope.
It's interesting.
So when I was much younger, I really identified with Jo March from Little Women, right? She's this, and Winona Ryder at one point plays Jo March in
That's what Lucy just said in our Tangent Time
And
podcast.
So in this movie, I identified so much with Veronica, right? I was a smart kid who didn't get put ahead in school because I was already younger than all the kids in my class, and they thought it would be bad for me socially. So then I used my intelligence to plan, how to get alcohol from, adults for my other teenage friends to drink, and how to party in the woods without getting caught. Like, there was a lot about Veronica that I really identified with, as well as my taste for bad boys. But I've returned to her time and time again because she rejects the bad boy and then takes the power for herself. And it's so inspiring. And even though this movie is so dark and so cynical and deals with some really horrible truths about suicide and murder and violence and date rape and a lot of other things, I feel like Veronica Sawyer is a character that more contemporary women should know because of how she rejects him and then becomes the power herself. She also rejects Heather Duke, and she just steps up, and it's a beautiful thing.
Well, that's one of the reasons why, this movie and Mean Girls obviously gets compared. They get compared constantly.
And I don't think that the similarities in Mean Girls are in any way an accident. I think it's so direct.
But it is also so much more superficial. It's clearly not as dark or intense. Like, yes, Regina George gets hit by a bus, and it's about 4 girls who are in this clique, and a, somewhat newcomer who is recently accepted into the group is, either trying to find out if they want to go along to fit in or if they want to go against it, and finding themselves. But one of the biggest contrasts to me, since we've been talking about how the movie ends with Veronica and her strength comes from, subverting high school social expectations and not getting the guy, letting him kill himself right in front of her, lighting her cigarette and not pursuing him, is such in stark contrast with how Katie ends up in Mean Girls. Like, she has this relationship with the popular boy, Aaron Samuels. Like, they end up being together.
And she's friends with the plastics at the end. They're all friends together. Instead of her...
They're all
like,
friends.
Supplanting them. They're just like...
They don't really dismantle it.
Yeah.
There's a little more bleed over, but Mean Girls seems to criticize, cattiness and being judgmental and the meanness of it. And I think Heather's goes a little deeper, where it's society's treatment of teenagers and the social hierarchy and how disruptive that really is, and how it doesn't seem to go away when you're an adult. I don't know. I like the parallels. I love looking at, Mean Girls compared to Heather's, but I don't know. I feel like Heather's has a bit of a deeper message and more depth than Mean Girls does.
And I don't think that Heather's could be made today. I don't think this movie could be produced and distributed widely with the number of, mass shootings and other violence that happens in high schools. I think that the prevailing wisdom would be like, oh, we can't poke fun at or satirize violence in high school, and we can't, show a kid like killing other people in high school. It'll give kids ideas as if they don't already have those ideas. Yeah. And the American society, they don't like to look at the whole meaning of something before they ban it. So I just feel like if somebody tried to release Heathers today, they'd be like, you're glorifying violence in high schools. Ban it.
It's also, I feel like it's a movie aimed at kids, at teenagers, not young kids, but teenagers for the most part. Adults can enjoy it, but it feels like it's speaking to teenagers. And in my opinion, not talking down to them. There's a lot of profanity. There's a lot of just casual talk about sex, and it's things that I don't even know if there are a lot of teen movies today, but I feel like it felt really sharp edged to me, like, oh, wow, they're really just talking openly about this stuff. But you have to remember back when you were a teenager, and you did talk like that when you weren't around adults. And it felt like you were being respected, I think, to watch a movie like this and just have them be like that. And I personally like that. I know some people don't.
The other things,
more realistic.
The other media that was around at the time that dealt with teenage suicide, there was like Dead Poets Society was around that same time. And then there were a lot of like sort of after school special and, very special episodes of TV where
I think Phoebe Cates.
Yeah, it was like more condescending and definitely more focused on sort of individual responsibility in suicidality, like not saying it's the fault of the system or pointing out how much bullying goes on with nobody doing anything about it. But this movie, it was like, high school sucks. It is hard. People treat each other like garbage, and you don't really know what you're doing. And, you're like half an adult and half a kid, and it's hard and confusing. And not everybody makes it out of high school alive. And it's respectful. Literally. I remember feeling like the movie got me in a way that other movies didn't. And I think that's why I loved it so much in high school when I was in high school.
I just would, because one of the things that was bothering me so much is because I do think it wanted us at first to identify with, I could see wanting to kill these people. And I just think we need less thinking like that, where, nope, like this person is an other and just look at their stereotypical qualities, hate them and want to kill them. No, we need to look beyond that and connect with each other and love, it's as corny as it sounds, like, we need stuff that trains us to look deeper with people and to try to understand each other. And so that's why it was so much bothering me. Like, I don't like revenge fantasies.
I think, though, that this movie was not about look behind the stereotype to find a deeper person. This movie was about
because these people were
killing people doesn't solve the problem because it's a systemic problem. Right. It's not any individual horrible person that is the problem.
Well, that is kind of a critique I had with the movie is Veronica decides, you know what, you really shouldn't kill because someone else will just come and take their place. It's not good to kill people.
Well, and she does say when one of which Heather is it? Is it McNamara that tries to kill herself in the bathroom by taking pills? Mm-hmm. And Veronica stops her and she says, like, you're throwing away your life. So it's like she is finally getting to that point.
Suicide is a private thing.
Heather, you're throwing your life away to become a statistic in the U.S. fucking A today. Now that is about the least private thing I can think of.
What about Heather and Kurt and Ram? Everyone jumped off a bridge, would you? Probably. Now, if you were happy every day of your life, you wouldn't be a human being, you'd be a game show host.
And I think
I like that moment.
That was a real connection.
It ties into the whole idea that
it stood out.
Society is both fascinated with teen problems, but doesn't want to take any sort of responsibility or look at the individual or how they can fix it. But there has always been this fascination with, the dark side of being a teenager. And I think only until recently, like you were talking about, all of these after school special feels, talking about bulimia or bullying or date rape or suicide. I remember a ton of shows when I was growing up that dealt with self-harm. Mm-hmm. And it seems like, it was acknowledged and there were shows about it and movies about it, but that was about where it ended. And it was still like, there was a lot of issues with it being for entertainment and not really going any deeper.
This was also the era of the Just Say No campaign, which was one of the most cynical things that the U.S. government has ever done. They're like, fighting drug addiction is hard and expensive. Let's just make it seem like it's people's individual responsibility. And then they was this Band-Aid. It was like, oh, just say no. And that's like supposed to fix everything. And there's records that have been released since Reagan was out of office where there were meetings where they were like, we don't want to do a whole program. Let's just do this like public service announcement garbage.
Like you said, the coffee mugs.
It's very surfacey and it lacks substance. But that was the prevailing sort of style at the time, was just like Band-Aid it. Remember this is your brain on drugs? The egg, the frying egg commercials, and like there wasn't any actual counseling that went on, at least not at my high school. There wasn't any real information. It was very binary. It was like, doing drugs is bad. Drugs are bad. And it was like, what about different kinds of drugs? All drugs are bad. Okay, what about prescription drugs? Talk to your doctor. Like, there was no real messaging. There was no real education. There was nobody to talk to. There was nobody to go to except each other.
Well, I remember the DARE program.
Yeah, that was after my time.
Did you guys have... Okay, so that was what was primarily happening in my elementary school. DARE, and we had like McGruff the crime dog, and it was always focused on people offering you drugs. Like it would
the pusher stereotype,
or
right?
Cocaine, peer pressure, don't fall into peer pressure.
And I kept wondering, when am I going to get offered these drugs?
Like
what's wrong with me? How come?
Yeah. What happened way more often would be like you'd see somebody at a party and they were doing drugs and you were like, can I get in on that? And they'd be like, this cost a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the fact that nobody addressed, the people taking bars or Xanax or people taking Adderall to stay up all night. None of that was talked about. I was just told somebody's going to offer me a joint and I should say no.
Yeah, that was the extent of the drug education.
It's the same kind of thing where there's this fascination. We talk about it. We talk about all the problems that teenagers face. It just seems like there's not a lot of action until fairly recently.
And not a lot of teenagers in the conversation. Right? It's adults talking about the problems with teenagers. and then telling teenagers what to do. And I don't remember very many adults actually talking to us. It was more like at us, like just say no.
Yeah. That's why I never want, because I felt like, adults aren't giving us enough credit a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And as I got older, I was like, holy shit, I thought there was just going to be this time that clicked in where suddenly I knew everything, and it didn't really happen. I still feel like I have not that different of a brain as I did when I was a teenager, but because I look different, people treat me different,
Yeah.
Of course, you do get wiser, you do learn more of the ways of the world, but not that extreme,
Yes. It's funny you say that. I asked my dad, who just turned 69. I asked him the other day when I was in Houston visiting, I was like, when did you feel like, an adult, like an adultier adult. Like finally, like, oh, okay, yeah, like finally I'm an adult now. He was like, I don't know. I mean, I've learned a lot, but I still feel pretty much the same. It's still me when I was in high school, when I was in college, when I was in my 20s. Like, I don't feel that different. There's no moment where it just all comes together. You just grow. He was like, sometimes I look in the mirror and I'm just like, whoa, that's my face. I was like, this is kind of terrifying to think about, that, when we're teenagers, the way that you are talked down to sometimes and treated by adults, you must think like, oh, they really have their shit together. Like, they know what's going on. One day I will. And it's like, nope.
Yeah. It's not that. It's just that everyone, like when you're driving, everyone that's faster than you is an asshole, and everyone who's slower is an idiot.
Yeah.
It's like that.
That's true. Well, and it's, we talk about the violence and the darkness in this. One thing that drove me insane is in the cafeteria scene at the beginning, when JD pulls out a real gun and is not even like a foot or two away from Kurt and Ram, and he shoots them, makes it seem like in the head with blanks, they would be dead. Their skulls would fracture. Like, people seem to think that blanks are just like you get hit with a pillow.
Air.
Fired. Yeah. That is not, like, blanks are lethal.
Brandon Lee died, I think.
Yep. And in close range, like, they would be dead. And that, when I saw that, I was like, okay, I have to suspend my disbelief.
Yeah, and
like,
he would be so expelled.
But,
like, there's no way. Although, I gotta say, it was different in the 80s. I went to high school in...
You could shoot blanks in the cafeteria as long as you didn't point the gun
but
at
kids...
someone. No, I'm just
kids
kidding.
brought their hunting rifles to school and kept them in their lockers.
Oh, wow.
Or they would have them in their cars in the parking lot. And it was, because where I lived was like on the edge of like the suburbs and rural, like in New Hampshire, like between like a suburban area and like really woodsy, backwoodsy farmland, rural areas. And there were plenty of kids who hunted for dinner and like brought their hunting stuff to school with them and then would go hunting after school. And it was not that strange to see somebody with a gun in our high school. I mean, I remember at the time being like, whoa, that's a real gun. Because I didn't happen to have experience with guns, but I got used to it by the time I was a senior. I was like, yeah, that's what happens here. That's New Hampshire. I guess that's normal. I don't think that's what happens at that high school today. But in the 80s, there hadn't been all these school shootings. There wasn't, I mean, the idea of like security at the high school, no, we had nothing like that. People could just walk in. Anybody could walk in.
No metal detectors or doors locked, stopping someone from walking in randomly.
Yeah, I mean,
when I was a kid, there was talk about cow tipping a lot in Modesto, California, but I'm pretty sure it was an urban legend and that no one ever did it. Because I remember asking, has anybody ever actually done that? No, anybody you know? And someone said if you actually did that, it would kill the cow with all the weight, So it was funny to see. So watching that scene in Heathers, you could see that it wasn't a real cow, they just staged it. But
I've also heard that it's not possible, like that the center of gravity of the cow and everything.
I heard that
like
too.
Humans wouldn't be able to do it.
You have to have your friend bend down on the other side.
Well, and this might be a good time to bring up the fact. We'll talk a little bit about it in trivia. That in 2018, there was a Heathers TV show that was released. And thinking about, could this movie be made now? How would it be received? The TV show told us pretty much exactly how it would be received, because first there was a trailer that was released for the TV show, and it does have a brief scene of, kid loading gun, the Veronica character loading a gun, one of the other characters pointing a gun, and there was definitely indication of, gun violence in school. And, since 1989, there has been a significant increase in gun-related incidents at school and kids losing their lives. So there was this uproar with the trailer first being released. And then after that uproar, Paramount was, okay, he's like, all right, we'll delay it a little bit. They moved it to March of 2018. And in February of 2018, on February 14th, the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting happened in Parkland, Florida, and 17 people are killed and another 17 injured from being shot. And the outcry about that caused Paramount to delay the premiere even more to July of 2018. And then the Santa Fe High School shooting in the Houston area in Santa Fe, Texas, happened on May 18th of 2018, just a couple months before it was supposed to premiere again. And in that shooting, 8 students and 2 teachers were shot and killed. And Paramount then was like, okay, we'll delay it even more. So they came out a few weeks after the Santa Fe shooting and said that they were again delaying the premiere. And finally, they showed it on Paramount on October 25th of 2018, and it lasted 1 season. They had to remove a whole episode because of how it involved a shooting and guns in a school, and it just was not received well. And part of it was, in Heathers, you see this very stereotypical, it's these thin white girls that kind of run the school and are popular, and they look down on the quote-unquote geekier people and the girl who's overweight. And this movie, or this TV show, had the main character, the main Heather, as kind of this almost alternative punkish girl who was overweight, and then a other girl of color who was another Heather, and then the third Heather was a gay guy, this gay teenage redhead kid. And there are so many people that were like, this doesn't really work, because those are the marginalized
those are the people who would be
and
bullied.
They're still getting picked on today. Like, this does not make much sense. So it was kind of doomed from the beginning. But thinking about the movie as it was then being released today would be even worse than the reception for the TV show. I think we're kind of getting to the point where we are absolutely sick and tired every time there's another school shooting that's in the news. I don't think people can even really make light of it in the slightest anymore.
It's unfortunate that the move is let's not talk about it rather than let's talk about it more. After every shooting, there's always this push of like, don't politicize it. It's the grieving families. You have to respect them. And I think we need to talk about it a lot more than we do. And that politicizing it is exactly what needs to happen.
Yeah, that's just a bullshit thing that people say because they don't want to change the gun laws.
It bleeds over into entertainment that is, run by big corporations, that they don't want to create entertainment that's going to get a big outcry, that's going to upset a lot of people. They want to make money.
It's like if your house is on fire and they were like, don't put out the fire because we don't want to upset the grieving people in the house.
Right, exactly. And what they really don't want to upset is their corporate sponsors, right? Because they don't want an uncomfortable conversation happening that is tied to their name. Yeah. And that's why the indie films that were happening in the 80s and 90s, there's just not the same kind of market. Now, to find that kind of content, you need to go to sort of independently produced things that are distributed on the internet. You're not going to see them in movie theaters. That's not where that kind of content is going to end up, because corporations are not going to distribute it. And so if a movie like Heathers was going to come out, something that was going to really take on the topic of like violence in high school and show this kind of shocking material, it would have to be something that was distributed like that series Chewing Gum that came out, where somebody just produced it themselves and posted it on YouTube, and eventually it got picked up because it became popular. But that's the only way this kind of material can get distributed now, is it has to be like one person's passion project, because the big studios that are all merging to become just like one big corporation are never going to put out this kind of edgy material that is, you know, that makes people have to look at the mirror and be like, am I part of the problem? I'm part of the system. Like,
self-reflection.
No, that's bad for popcorn sales.
That's crazy.
It's just the state of the movie industry. I mean, I feel like I feel like there are a lot of smaller movies coming out, but they just don't get a lot of promotion, and they all slip by. They don't get traction. So maybe there's some that would, if they came out in another decade, be big hits, you know, but we're just conditioned now to look to TV for the kind of thoughtful stuff, and movies, you go to the movies to see the big blockbusters for the most part.
Also, I think the funniness of this movie and the quippy dialogue and all the fun slang makes it a lot more sticky in our consciousness. If it was just serious, I don't think anybody would be talking about it anymore. It would be gone. It's the cleverness.
It's about the vibe, the cleverness, and the black comedy.
Because it is funny. There are a lot of really funny moments. Yeah. As well as heartfelt ones and violent ones and upsetting ones. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I love the cast, the chemistry between Winona Ryder and Christian Slater was great, and it's just independently of the dark subject matter, it's a good movie. I enjoy it, even as I was disturbed by it. I was enjoying it.
It flows really well narratively. It's got the framing device of Veronica's diary entries works really well to give us her point of view in they're relatively short scenes. It's not a lot of voiceover, but it gives us enough of Veronica's flavor. And I love the monocle, the like affectation of putting a monocle in whenever she writes in her diary. I can't get enough of it. It's so funny.
It's so
I
good.
think that there are a lot of sort of structural and narrative choices that work really beautifully. The dream sequences are really great. The use of Que Sera Sera at the beginning, and the image of these three pretty girls in a pretty floral garden with croquet mallets, and then they just like stomp on the flowers, and then Veronica's head is buried. You know, she's buried up to her head in the ground. It tells you right from that first Que Sera Sera opening number that this is not going to be a comfortable movie. This is not going to be expectations. Like, something dark is about to happen. I think it works.
What was that, by the way? Like, I thought we were going to get back to that scene and find out how
that was a dream.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it was a dream she was having about her
horrible friends.
Asshole friends.
Yeah. And that it leads.
Yeah. I've only got a chance to watch it once.
It leads
clearly.
right into her first diary entry where she's like, Heather says that she teaches people real life. She said real life sucks losers dry. If you want to fuck with the Eagles, you got to learn how to fly. And I said, you're beautiful.
I love that line. Well, and what you mentioned, Penny, and what we've been talking about with, you know, kind of the issue with violence today and politically ignoring school shootings and shootings in general, there's a New Yorker article that we can link in the show notes called Heathers Blew Up the High School Comedy by Naomi Fry. And the last paragraph of that article kind of sums it up pretty wonderfully. And it says, in the end, it is Veronica who emerges as the movie's true hero. In her resistance to the Heathers and later JD, she follows a path not just toward her own liberation, but more broadly toward a new decade. Heathers is almost proto-grunge in its disdain for the Reaganite fantasy. By presenting American violence side by side with American wholesomeness, the movie dismantles the flimsy alibi the latter so often provides for the former. To watch Heathers as a teenager was to understand, maybe for the first time, that the way things are isn't the way things should be. To watch it now as an adult is to remember what it was like to grasp that lesson and want to learn it anew. And I was like, that's
really good.
That's great. And that makes it sound like the perfect movie for that year, because it did go, there was a change in the way things felt in the 90s from the 80s.
Definitely. Moving from the Reagan era into the Clinton era and all the things that came along with that in the 90s. It really was a different time.
I wish more people would go back and rewatch this movie, honestly.
A few will because of you guys.
I hope so.
So I have some questions of things that I didn't understand. One of them was that scene in the beginning, but you mentioned it was a dream. Also, why did Veronica burn herself with a cigarette?
I think that was a moment of trying to feel something because she had just done something horrible. It was like a self-punishment. And also a little bit of a back to reality moment. Like, is this really happening? Is this really my life? And like, that was like a wake up call. And then of course, you know, JD does that thing where he lights a cigarette off of the burn that is just so twisted.
It's crazy.
And dark.
I pictured, it reminds me of, in a Da Vinci Code, Silas engages in this self-flagellation. And I see it as that, like an act of contrition almost, and to remind herself
that pain is real,
that she can feel, and that pain is, you know, significant.
Yeah.
That's how I took it.
I think it's interesting because you could interpret it. Those are two different interpretations, but maybe they could both be true. But it was, I love moments in movies like that where it's not cut and dried.
Yeah, you're like, what the hell?
But okay. Also, in the cafeteria in the beginning, they went around asking people their question, and they were brushing up on conversational skills for the party. Is that what they were doing?
That
I didn't quite get
I
why
think they do the
that.
poll every week as part of, it's like for the newspaper or whatever, and that the brushing up on conversational skills was just her Heather Chandler's comment on how she didn't like talking to nerds.
Okay, got it.
Well,
all right, and then what about the question? You inherit $5 million on the same day that aliens land and say they're going to blow up the planet in 2 days. What do you do?
It's such a dumb question because you're not going to get the money in any amount of time that helps.
Yeah.
And also, you know, the whole world is going to be completely insane. My favorite answer is the guy who wants to invest it.
If they know about it, it's the money's going to do no
meaningless.
good because... But if only you knew about it, then what?
Well, I kind of took it as a commentary on the way money and wealth kind of replaces the social, you know, teenage high school hierarchy when you're older. Like, you can see, and that's probably I'm reading too much into it, but everyone focuses on the $5 million and the money, and you can see people's eyes light up and focus on the money aspect of it, as opposed to the fact that the Earth is going to be blown up in 2 days. Everyone addresses the money, and nobody addresses the fact, for the most part, that the Earth is ending.
And they all also seem to, their answers are meant to get a specific reaction from Heather, and not necessarily anything to do with reality, right? That one girl, Courtney, is like I'd give it all to the homeless. And then, you know, and Betty's like, oh, I'd have an end of the world get together. Like, you know, she's just like always wants to be the nicest person, but I love the guy who's like, I'd slide that over to my dad. He's one of the best brokers in the state. I was like, that's the funniest possible answer to that question because it just is so pointless. So I also love the guy who does the tax math.
Oh yeah, that was funny.
Even JD's answer was a very, like I said, John Cusack, like sensitive, quirky, edgy guy. I would be out on a lake with my sax and Bach or something.
Like whatever.
That's when he's still like this charming outsider.
That's quirky and you know, faux deep, right? Like, oh, I'd play my sax, and you know, whatever.
But
that's why it's so shocking the first time when he pulls out that gun.
I know what that was such a great moment. But
what are you doing?
I don't know, this might be a bit of a stretch, but I think the movie ends, there was a little bit that felt like it was an echo of that question, and I can't remember the exact dialogue, but I think...
Oh, is it when he says,
it's a stupid...
imagine I blew up all the schools, what are you going to do with the rest of your life?
Yeah. And then it makes it into... changes it from a stupid question to more like the feeling of, you could die at any time, so what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to spend it feeding into this system that everyone else dictates for you, or are you just going to do your own thing? That's kind of what I got from that. So it almost turned it into something that actually was deep.
I'm glad you made that connection because I didn't connect those two, and it does kind of bookend the film.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I have more questions. Good. A couple more.
This is why I wanted you to do this, Jason, because fresh perspective.
So this is more of a philosophical question. I think I know what answer you guys are going to say, but is this movie at all homophobic?
I mean, characters are.
Yes. Yes.
There's a difference between characters being homophobic and a movie being homophobic.
Because I think it's almost making fun of the homophobia that existed at the time.
But it also takes it as characters sort of like an accepted part of teenage society, that like being gay, because Veronica and JD used the homophobia against Ram and Kurt. It's both a comment that homophobia is wrong, but also it kind of accepts homophobia. It's a little of both.
Yeah. It feels like one of those things like, oh, we didn't know any better back then, even though they were trying to do the best they could.
Well, the dad's reaction, I love my dead gay son. They make the comment like something. I wonder if he was
how would he feel about
or something like that
with a pulse?
Yeah, that's kind of cringy, but it's a good point. Like at the time where he, in death he's accepting, but it's still this huge.
Well, it's like
societal
whenever somebody says
issue.
In a conversation about a relationship, like, gun to your head, do you choose me over your job? And it's like, when you put it in the stark contrast of death, right? The kid is dead. So he had, the father, is grieving and going through this loss. Whereas if a kid came to their dad and said, I'm gay, the father isn't going to have the same kind of grief in order to temper their homophobia, right? Because the kid's alive, they're just going to have the homophobia. Who knows if Kurt's father would have accepted him or not? We don't know. But I will say,
I'm thinking not, given how shitty everyone is.
I will say that line, the number of times I've said to someone like, oh, I'm going to be podcasting about Heathers, and they say back to me, I love my dead gay son, is amazing. Yeah. It's one of the most quoted lines all the time.
Okay, and then last, at the end, you thought she killed JD, but then he stumbles out alive with the bomb strapped to himself. So if he has the bomb and he's alive, why did he not just blow it up in the boiler room, or even just walk right into the pep rally?
I think it has to do with what he says to Veronica when he comes out there. First, he's like, you really fucked me up. And so he knows he's going to die, or he thinks he's going to die at that point. That's part of it. But then I think he says, you have power that I didn't think you had. And I think out of respect for that power, it's some kind of twisted way in his head. He's like, I'm going to honor that power in you by not blowing up the school.
Yeah.
It felt something like that. Yeah, like what she did changed his
but
mind.
Not enough for him to live.
Yeah.
Like he was like, but I'm still going to blow up.
I was fine with that.
I really was like, at what point is someone going to find the dynamite strapped to the bottom of the bleachers? Like, how long is that going to be in the school?
I know.
Well, that stoner came pretty close.
That was hilarious.
Pretty close.
I was thinking Veronica should have called that in. Like, you better do a sweep.
Who knows how many other sticks of dynamite there are hidden around the school.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things... Did you have any more questions?
Those were great questions.
That's all.
I enjoyed that. One of the things that we haven't really talked about that I did want to touch on was the kind of date rape aspect in Heather's. And the first time, what struck me this time around is I did not really pay attention to what was going on in the background in that cow tipping scene when Veronica is walking up to meet JD. When
Ram
I
is like
in high
fully
school,
assaulting Heather McNamara.
Yes, like, and there's I can't remember where I read. There's a one
and it's not even commented on
about it. No, it's just so it's almost like it's just so accepted and normalized.
I don't think she realizes that was
she
rape.
Tries to commit suicide. Probably not. But that was so powerful this time around when I was just like, holy shit. Like, that's more violent than I remember. And then the casual, they go to this, I'm assuming I guess it's a college party with these two guys. And Veronica, we see her not really, asking her guy to go back to the party. And he's like, no, not yet. And then she just kind of immediately gives in and very unenthusiastically bends over to give
Heather
him oral
Chandler.
sex.
Yeah. And then, she does not look happy about it at all.
No. And then, Veronica is immediately like, no. And he's just like, come on. Like, what does he say? Save your speech for...
Malcolm X.
I can't remember. Yeah. I was like, damn, man.
And she's like,
I just want to get
my
laid.
speech.
He sucked. That guy was awful.
He really was. And that, the way it treats it so casually in the film, I think is also intentional because it was kind of a fact of life almost then. And sometimes
even the way JD keeps grabbing her.
Yes,
and
he is
kissing
forceful.
on her. And I kind of wonder about that. Like, I feel like
that
is not necessarily a commentary on how awful he was, but more of a product of its time.
I think also
that
the two of them had a lot of sexual chemistry, and it was a little bit like, I know if I can just break through her resistance, that'll kick in and she'll be back on my side. Like,
you sound like
I think
a
that's
frat
what
boy.
he was trying to do.
Yeah. That would make sense.
That's what a lot of guys are trying to do.
I speak from experience of having been on the receiving end of an attempt like that, and it's
I mean, that's the rationale of a lot of guys.
They're like, oh, she'll like it.
The first and last.
Seriously
though, the first and last frat party I ever went to was within, I think, my second month of college. I went to visit some friends at UT, and it was a terrible idea. It was a foam party. I had never heard of a foam party, and it's wall-to-wall foam where you can't really always see through it, and the number of times where somebody would like come up behind you and obviously
a lot of groping,
rope you, or having to like step on somebody's foot and elbow a few times. I was like, I'm out of here, and I never went back. But hearing from my other friends, after we talked about it that night and they continued to go, they're like, oh, that's just how it is here. That's how frat guys are. You just kind of have to deal with it. And I was like, why? Why do you just have to deal with it? And that's the same mentality kind of, especially in the late 80s and how Hollywood portrayed it. And I'm assuming what was kind of reflective of real life is that you just came to expect it. And, Winona Ryder, her character is like, well, I have this speech that I give my suitors. So it's clear that she has faced this many times before and has a whole speech prepared for it. But that's just kind of one sliver of the film that doesn't really take up that much time, but it was pretty impactful this time around. coming to the realization that he's just assaulting her in the background. I'm like, well, this movie is
Veronica
important.
just leaves her like that. Even though she's a friend.
Yep, she doesn't even look back.
And then when Heather calls into the Hot Probs radio show, which, okay, I would listen to it too. And she's like, the last guy I had sex with killed himself the next day. I'm like, that guy raped you. But she doesn't seem to grasp that that's what happened. She just accepts it. And I think about how many women I know who have been sexually assaulted who have been like, is that what that was? I thought it was just something I didn't enjoy. And it's like, well, were you consenting? No. Well, that's assault. That's rape.
It's unfortunately very common.
Ingrained in women's socialization to be like flattered by a man's attention even when you don't want it. It takes a lot of re-education to teach yourself, like, no, that's not flattering, it's gross. Like, you're taught when you're a kid, like, oh, that boy who hit you, it's because he likes you. Oh, he pulled your hair, it's because he likes you. Oh, he groped you in the dark one time, it's because he likes you. And it's like, I don't care if he likes me or not, that's not okay. But I didn't learn that until later,
Nope. You sent me flashing back to elementary school when we were brownies and like second or third grade. I think it was third grade. We had our uniforms, and whenever we would wear our uniforms, it became this trend, or during recess, there were certain boys that would chase some of us, and the goal was just like to pull your pants down. And I remember when we finally like went up to the teachers, they're like, well, tell them to stop, but it just means they like you. They're just, and I was like, now as an adult thinking about that, I was like, what the hell? Like, what are you talking about?
And I think, you guys would know more than me, but I was so impressed with the whole Me Too movement, and it felt like a big societal shift. Of course, it's probably not enough, but it's not enough, but it is big, and it just changed the way we look at these things and talk about them, and hopefully it's
a step in the right direction of acknowledging that kind of behavior is not okay. I think just the fact that
and then it's okay to talk about it, like speak up if something happened to you, and to see yourself as having had something bad,
I was out with my brother and his daughter when she was about 5, and she has this friend who loves her. He loves her. And he's also like head and shoulders bigger than her, even though they're the same age. And he saw her from a distance and yelled her name and ran toward her. And she held her hand up like, stop. And she said, wait, you give me a gentle hug. And he stopped and slowed down and gave her a gentle hug. And I was like, the next generation gets it. Like, I was so excited.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, boundaries set.
This 5-year-old has better boundaries than I do.
I was so proud. And I was like, did you teach her that? And Bill's like, I think they taught that at her school. And I was like, that was amazing.
That's nice.
Yeah, so stuff like that.
That's the future. I was never taught anything like that. If a little boy had knocked me over when I was 5, my teachers would have been like, brush it off. Like, it would have been fine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and my parents even, I remember, would say stuff like that. Oh, he's making fun of you, or he's doing this because he likes you, or, he's just being mean to you because he likes you. And they weren't, they were well-meaning, and they would simultaneously tell me, like, my dad repeatedly was like, if anybody touches you, you don't want to be touched, just kick them in the balls. I'm like, okay, Dad.
Yeah, that's going to go over well.
I've got that. Yeah. But I remember hearing that, and I think, our eyes have been opened more so as a culture, and Me Too was one of the first times that I ever felt like I could see some real change in my lifetime. And seeing people, on social media, not just celebrities, people I knew in real life, putting, Me Too, that alone, or sharing some experience. I think it was a big movement for, one, women not to feel as alone and see this really is something that everybody's gone through. But a lot of men who may not have realized how prevalent it was got to see people in their lives kind of open up and share. And I feel like, well, there's a predictable, backlash to any sort of progress. This one felt important.
Yeah, I think it...
And it has some staying power.
I think it has definitely moved the cause in the right direction. I want to bring up another film that I don't think enough people have seen. It's a documentary called Bully, and it's maybe, 8 years old. And the amazing thing about this documentary, and the reason Heather's reminded me of it, is that time and time again, it got footage where kids knew they were being filmed of horrific bullying happening between children, and teachers and adults doing absolutely nothing about it and not even acknowledging that it was anything. And the kids going home and being like, there was a guy on the bus who was mean to me, and their parents being like, I'm sorry, honey, go to your room. Just not responding to it. And the scene at the funeral where Ram and Kurt pick on that geeky kid and make him say he likes to suck big dicks or whatever, there's tons of people standing around and nobody did anything about it. They were all I'm sure somebody said, oh, boys will be boys. It was just, the bullying that happens in the movie is horrible. And I know that it's worse today with the internet and cyberbullying and how it follows kids even, when they leave a school and it goes to their next school, they can't ever escape from it. And there's a real attitude of look the other way on the part of adults that really upsets me. And I wish more people would see that documentary, because the way that the bullies in it behave with impunity, fully aware of cameras.
That sounds very
blows
familiar.
My mind.
Is it?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah,
it's heartbreaking.
I think that I remember a kid with glasses in particular, and a scene of him getting hit on the bus, and I was just like, there's a camera right there.
So what happens when there's not a camera there, right? If that's what kids feel emboldened enough to do, or bullies feel emboldened enough to do in front of people, what is happening when there's not a camera? It's disturbing.
Well, that's in Heather's, in the cafeteria, the way that they're, all excited to
pick on Martha.
It's so sad. And it's just, in Veronica, we see immediately that she's hesitant. She's like, I don't have anything against her. Why would I be doing this? And she, kind of goes along and ends up writing the note. And the reaction of Kurt and his, bursting into hysterical laughter is just,
it's devastating.
Horrible. And I feel like that kind of thing, that I remember certain instances like that happening when I was in middle school in particular, and, kids being, just horrible for no reason. So that's at least one area where we definitely still have a lot to tackle.
I remember this kid in my elementary school who was just kind of the kid everyone picked on. And I remember standing by and not doing anything. Yeah. And I felt bad about it later. I wish I would have stepped in or did something, And then I met him as a teenager, and I recognized him, and I just felt this sense of shame, but I didn't apologize to him. I didn't want to bring it up,
Yeah.
Remember when
there was a kid in my middle school who everyone picked on. He was awkward and he had a lot of acne and he was smart, and so people picked on him. And I remember at the 8th grade dance, this one really popular girl named Shelley asked him to dance and danced with him 3 or 4 songs. And I was a nerdy, picked on kid too at that point in my life. And so I never felt like I was, powerful enough to step in. But seeing her do that made such a huge impression on me that,
it's just like Veronica.
I think about it.
Of Heather's.
Whenever I see bullying, I think about her and, what right parenting happened in her life that led to that moment, or what experience did she have that got her to like see this lonely kid as a person and like ask him to dance, even though, you know, probably her other popular friends would make fun of her about it. It was beautiful. And I wish I could remember her last name, because she's such an inspiration.
I think it is a lot of, you know, like natural empathy combined with parenting, because my parents were, they reacted immediately anytime my brother and I said anything remotely bad about another kid. And my dad was always big on, you know, he was like, I was friends with everybody in high school. Like, you just gotta, people are all struggling. Everyone's a person. Doesn't take anything to be nice. And that still sticks with me. And I remember, you know, the difference it makes to say hi to someone or sit by someone at lunch who is used to being ignored. Like, kids are terrible. And it's just, I don't know. I wish more people actively talked about that, because I think a lot of parents, I would assume, and obviously I'm not a parent, I don't know, there's some relief if, you know, your kid isn't experiencing any sort of bullying like that. But I was very thankful, you know, growing up, that my parents called it out immediately if we were talking about someone, or saying, you know, if someone shows up in clothes that are dirty, or if someone shows up in clothes that are out of style, my parents were always like, you don't know what their family can afford. Maybe they're going through a hard time. Maybe, you know, always instilling empathy and being able to see it from another perspective. And
that's good parenting.
I don't know. I wish there was more of that.
There is a growing anti-bullying movement that focuses on positive peer pressure. The idea being that peer pressure is extremely powerful, and that if there are more nice kids than mean kids, and if those nice kids band together and say like, bullying is stupid, we don't like you to bully people, then eventually it'll turn the tide. But I think it has to be
another way of
constantly reinforced, because tattling is not the answer.
It reminds me of that. No, but that movie, what is it? Good Lord. Like, is it 21 Jump Street, where Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum go back as undercover like cops in a high school, and Channing Tatum's character is so used to, you know, when he was in high school around 2005, which is when I was in high school, it was quote unquote cool if you were the jock and like pushing someone into a locker, although I don't remember seeing anything like that. And he's like calling people like homosexual slurs, and he tries it in front of the cool kids in this school, and they're immediately like, whoa man, that's homophobic, like calling him out. So it's now cool to you know, call that shit out and be accepting. And I was like, this is nice.
Yeah,
this is
you're problematic.
Positive peer pressure. It's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, I like it. As opposed to in Heathers, where you got that Hydra analogy was so perfect. Like, you cut the head off the snake,
another one grows in its place.
Another appears. Whereas, you know, maybe we can just dismantle that entirely, and there won't be another head that grows back.
I just had one more thing to mention, which is that Winona Ryder will be back, I believe, in the Beetlejuice
I just
sequel
saw a photo
coming out in September. There were photos out today, and I love my favorite thing about the movie so far is the title Beetlejuice, because then you know if there's another sequel what it's going to be called.
That's
and then Beetlejuice
and
will
I
appear
think Jenna
everywhere.
Ortega is such good casting to play Winona Ryder's daughter. I'm excited for Beetlejuice too.
She's amazing.
And you know, and the fact that Catherine O'Hara is coming back, and that what's his name, Michael Keaton, I've seen pictures of him in the costume, and it's identical. It's like he hasn't aged. It's going to be great.
Let's see, I'm looking
Directed
at
by Tim Burton too.
It's going to be good.
Oh
yeah.
Awesome.
I got to rewatch the first one.
Me too. Yeah.
All right, what do you think, guys? Should we get into some trivia?
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Jason, want to start us off?
All right, so Daniel Waters wrote Heathers as a spec script. Originally wanted Stanley Kubrick to direct the movie. Can't imagine. Out of admiration for Kubrick's own black comedy film Dr. Strangelove, which I've never seen. Waters intended the film to contrast the optimistic teen movies of the era, particularly those written by John Hughes, by presenting a cynical depiction of high school imbued with dark satire. Mission accomplished.
Yeah, I would say so.
He definitely did that.
Waters also took inspiration from Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. The cafeteria scene near the start of Heathers was written as an homage to the barracks scene, which opens Full Metal Jacket. And it's like really like parallel. It's
Very
really cool.
similar. That's another movie that'll stick with you.
Yeah.
After seeing it. Let's see. Many actors.
That's the Kingpin guy.
Vincent
Right?
D'Onofrio?
Vince D'Onofrio, yeah.
Yeah, great
Just
soundtrack.
a psycho dude.
That is a good soundtrack. That's about all I can handle re-listening to, because that movie messes with me. Oh man. And of course we've talked about the very dark themes going on in this movie, and many actors and actresses turned down the project because of its dark subject matter, except Winona Ryder, who was 16 at the time of filming and so badly wanted the part of Veronica, actually begged Waters to cast her as Veronica, and she even offered to work for free if he would cast her. And at first, he didn't think that she was pretty enough, and Ryder has even been quoted about, herself at the time. She's like, I didn't look that different from my character in Beetlejuice. I was very pale. I had blue-black dyed hair. And she said, I went to Macy's at the Beverly Center and had them do a makeover on me.
Nice.
It's so cute.
Love
that. Winona Ryder's agent was completely opposed to Ryder pursuing the role and was convinced it would ruin her career, so much so that she got down on her hands and knees to beg her not to take it. Then the same week Ryder received the script, a student from her high school committed suicide, which only inspired her more to do the film. The rest is history. I did not know that.
Amazing. Shannon Doherty had problems saying the profanities in the script because she had a very conservative upbringing, and she had trouble keeping a straight face. And as a result, in the scene where she says, Veronica, why are you pulling my dick? You can see she's kind of smirking because she just can't say it with a straight face.
That's so funny. Okay, and we did talk about this one earlier, that Christian Slater stated his performance was heavily inspired by Jack Nicholson. He claims he wrote a letter to Nicholson asking him to watch the film, but did not receive an answer. Maybe that's why I did not find him at all really appealing in this movie, because he sounded so much like Jack Nicholson. He was no longer Christian Slater to me.
See, but I have seen other Christian Slater movies, and I was already thinking of him that way, so he kind of seems that way in his other movies, too.
His Pump Up the Volume performance is very Nicholson-y.
Yeah.
I have not
And by the
seen
way, if you haven't seen that, every podcaster should go and watch that movie. It's a proto-podcaster movie, for sure.
Interesting.
It doesn't totally hold up, but it's definitely worth watching. It was a favorite of mine back in the day, for sure.
Nice.
Very good. Okay. Originally, the book that suicidal students supposedly underlined meaningful passages from was going to be The Catcher in the Rye, but they couldn't get permission from J.D. Salinger to use it, so they changed it to Moby Dick because Herman Melville's works are in the public domain.
Yeah, J.D. Salinger famously has never given anyone permission to do anything with Catcher in the Rye. That's why there's not a movie, and and he's a recluse, he's in hiding, no one knows where he lives. I don't know if he's still alive, but
I think he's not.
Yeah.
I think he died a few years back, but he was a recluse for a long time, and apparently there may be a bunch of unpublished works of his in existence.
That's great. There's a really funny moment in Mad About You where somebody is creating a resume and they're faking a lot of stuff, and they put down that they were a personal assistant to J.D. Salinger, but don't ask for a reference. And I always thought that was like a really clever lie.
Mm-hmm.
Christian Slater and Winona Ryder dated during the filming and promotion of this film, surprising no one.
I kind of wondered about that.
Yeah.
They have great chemistry on screen, so
Yeah.
why not in real life?
It's very true. And I'm going to throw in another bit of trivia, because we've already talked about the fact that Daniel Waters made up the lingo in this movie. So one thing that I found interesting as I was researching for the movie is that Winona Ryder says that this is her favorite film to date that she's done. And she says, you know, I love this movie to the point where I talk about it like I'm not even in it. If it's on TV, I watch it. I've probably seen it 50 times. I can do it by heart. So
that's
I love
amazing.
the image of her sitting there
cool.
just going along line for line with the movie.
It'd be fun to watch it with her.
Mm-hmm.
So when JD tricks Veronica into killing the jocks by claiming to use Ich Luge bullets, which he claims only pierce the skin. Ich Luge is German for I lie or I'm lying. Right before he tells her this, he asks if she knows German.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, what a blatant lie, too.
Yeah. And I was also thinking, even if it was true, you shot the guy in the throat.
Right?
That's probably not going to be
lethal.
Yeah. On a sad note, 2 of the cast members tragically died young in ways that were eerily prophesized by the script. Jeremy Applegate, whose character Peter prays he will never commit suicide, shot himself on March 23rd, 2000 at age 34. And Kim Walker, who plays Heather Chandler and asks Heather Duke, I think, did you have a brain tumor for breakfast? Died of a brain tumor on March 6, 2001 at age 32.
Jeez.
What is even more eerie and heartbreaking is that Applegate and Walker both died in March, which is when the movie came out.
Right.
Yeah, that's not fun. This next one is one of my favorites because I had never noticed it before. But a crow cawing can be heard after each death scene in the film, and it gets progressively louder each time. The sound is muffled when Heather Chandler dies indoors, and it's more obvious when Kurt and Ram are killed in the forest, and it's very loud after JD blows himself up.
That's freaky.
Right?
I gotta go back now and listen for it because I didn't notice that.
Seems like a Flanagan type thing. Mike
Yeah,
Flanagan.
Yeah,
it's
it
very
does.
Flanagan-ish.
When Heather Chandler falls through the glass table, a copy of the Cliff Notes for The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, who committed suicide, and a magazine with the cover story, The Fall of the American Teenager, are on top of the table. Yeah.
Quite appropriate details.
Yeah. And I think that JD even clocks the copy of the bell jar when he's scrambling after she dies to come up with the idea. It's never been clear to me if he had the idea of making it look like a suicide ahead of time or came up with it in the moment. Winona Ryder has claimed that she has many favorite moments from the film. The one that usually comes to mind is when she is walking up the hill after seeing JD in the cow tipping scene. In the background, just barely visible, Heather McNamara is being date raped by one of the jocks. Ryder says the scene is so subversive and dark that once you notice it, you can't stop thinking about it.
Well,
yes,
that's
that is true.
Yeah, because I didn't mention it when we were talking about it, but I only watched it once today, and my focus was on the other 2.
Right.
So I didn't even notice that. And then I read it in the Wikipedia summary, and I was like, holy shit.
It's crazy. And Daniel Waters, the writer of the movie, said in an interview, I did come up with this crazy cockamamie Heathers 2, where Veronica becomes a page for a senator named Heather, played by Meryl Streep. The ending is her assassinating the president and getting away with it. And it's a good thing. Winona Ryder has heavily supported the idea for a sequel, but as of 2021, nothing has come out, and I don't think it will. But imagining that with Meryl Streep is kind of hilarious.
Meryl Streep would probably do it too.
Yeah.
She has a great sense of humor.
That's true. Oh my goodness.
In the 2010, you know what I love of hers? I don't think a lot of people share my love of this movie, but Adaptation with Nicolas Cage.
Oh, that movie is so weird and messed up.
Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah.
I love it.
Funny.
Yeah.
In the 2010s, the movie Heathers inspired a stage musical and a TV show. In 2010, the film was adapted into a musical directed by Andy Fickman. It ran off-Broadway from March 15th, 2014 to August 14th, 2014, and then again off West End in London from June 19th, 2018 to August 4th, 2018. After being passed around and delayed a bit, on October 24th, 2018, a Heather's TV show premiered. We talked about this on the Paramount Network. Shannon Doherty, Heather Duke in the original film, portrayed Mrs. Jean, JD's mom, who committed suicide when he was just a child. Wow. The entire first season was a reboot of the original 1989 film. It was canceled after the first season. And I read in the wiki page that it was supposed to be an anthology season or series. So the next season would have been like another story with other people named Heather, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, a different high school.
That would have been interesting to see how they, completely revamped it. But alas.
Yeah.
It was
so the film, and we've talked about this, with like Mean Girls and Clueless, has had a lasting cultural impact. There are so many movies and shows that reference it either directly or indirectly. It's quoted and referenced so many times, it's impossible to cover all of the times that it has been referenced, but there's a few of them here that Kara pulled together.
Oh, yeah. So the first one, of course, we have to start off with acknowledging our very own Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In season 5, episode 15, titled I Was Made to Love You, Katrina, who is, spoiler alert for our Buffy people that are listening, is essentially a bot, a love bot.
Well, April is the love bot.
Oh, that's right. Katrina is the girlfriend.
Yeah.
The actual human. April is the love bot. And Katrina says, that's a weird sentence. Listen up, April. Warren is my boyfriend, mine. And you Heathers probably ought to figure that out. And I think that's a great one. It means so much more after having seen the movie. And then, of course, in the original 1992 movie, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Buffy quotes Heathers saying the iconic line, "What's your damage, Heather?"
And I think importantly, the person she says it to is not named Heather. It's like how we use Karen today. Like Heather becomes a phrase for like any mean high school
girl.
Right. Yeah. Except I don't like when people say that.
Yeah.
I have too many friends named Karen that are super nice.
So nice.
Me too.
In season 4, episode 13 of Supernatural, titled After School Special, one of the bullied teens has the nickname Martha Dump Truck.
That is, by the way, one of the funniest and best episodes of Supernatural.
It's so good.
So good. It's so good.
We talk about Supernatural every now and then on Buffy, so I was like, we should include this one. This is a fun tie-in.
Cool.
Heather's is also referenced and quoted countless times in the Amy Sherman Palladino series Gilmore Girls. Here's a couple of notable examples. In season 1, episode 11, the title of that episode is Paris is Burning. Rory tells her mom that the two of the popular girls at school have started being nice to her, Madeline and Louise, and Lorelai tells her that she's the new Heather. And in season 4, episode 22, Raincoats and Recipes, Rory quotes the film by asking her mom, Lorelai, "What's your damage, Heather?" There's a bunch of other references in Gilmore Girls as well.
It makes complete sense that Lorelai and Rory would watch and love Heathers. And just a couple other notable shows or films that it's been referenced in. We definitely cannot mention them all because they are truly almost infinite. It's countless and has clearly permeated society. But Gossip Girl is another one. Of course, that makes sense. Frasier, The Virgin Suicides, Will and Grace, Scary Movie, Veronica Mars, Psych, NCIS, Criminal Minds, and even ER has referenced and quoted the movie Heathers. So it's always fun to spot those.
Amazing. All right, so this is the point of the episode where I ask the question that is a little harder this time than it usually is.
Yeah.
And that is, does it still slay? Jason, what do you think? Does this movie still slay after all these years?
I mean, it's my first time seeing it, and it had a strong impact. I enjoyed it. I was disturbed, but I like when movies make me feel something. Like I said, if it had ended with Veronica joining JD and just fully going over to the dark side, I don't know how I would answer this question for sure, but given that it ended in a way that I liked, yes, I thought it hardcore slays.
Kara, what do you think? Still slay?
Makes sense. I think it absolutely does. Like, there's definitely some moments that have not aged well and are still a little cringy, but I almost think it's more relevant today, or just as relevant today. And, you know, it still makes me laugh. It's a classic. I think it will always slay.
All right. It's unanimous because I think it still slays as well. And I think the fact that it is so very 80s helps with the moments that don't age well, because there's no question that it's of its time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is very true.
And I try to be super forgiving of that, in part because 20 years from now, people are going to be looking at us and be like, you monsters.
Yeah.
Well, I'll never forget when I first started hearing people talking about how problematic Friends was after having not watched it since I was little, and then watching it over again. I was like, oh, okay. I see what people are talking about.
Lots of homophobia.
Yeah. The Office has stuff in there.
Yeah.
Seinfeld.
Yeah.
Jeez.
All right. So let's take a trip over to the Bronze and get ourselves some good Ohio brewskis and hear what some of our listeners had to say about Heather.
Bronze things of bronze.
I'll start us off. There's a fellow Buffy podcast called the Sunnydale Diaries, and they wrote in to say, I frequently yell out, Veronica, dinner! And also wanted to note that Veronica's mom played Grams in Charmed, who with Shannon Doherty.
I had not processed that at all. That makes me happy.
That's a character named Penny, so I'm very aware of her.
Penny focused. Do you guys correspond with them a lot? Go back and forth? That's cool.
We're just starting to.
Yeah, they've commented a couple times now, and so I started commenting on theirs. It's kind of fun.
That is cool. Our friend Erica F says, OMG, this is one of my favorites. Heart, heart, heart.
Thanks, Erica.
Love it. And Erica L said corn nuts, which makes me really happy. And she said, I just did a double feature of Jawbreaker and Heathers yesterday. I wondered if there was a nod to Heathers in Jawbreaker with the name of Miss Sherwood, since Heathers was set in Sherwood, Ohio. That really wouldn't surprise me. Jawbreakers is kind of a similar vibe, somewhat.
Yeah, that would be another good film for us to cover.
That would be fun.
And Andy F says... He misquotes. He says, I love my gay son, but it's, I love my dead gay son.
Maybe he just has a gay son.
Yeah, maybe.
That's true.
Congratulations, Andy. I'm so happy for you.
Yeah, thanks for writing in. Jolene A says, greetings and salutations. I'm so happy you're covering this film. This was genuinely the soundtrack of my teenage years. My introduction to Christian Slater, who I was obsessed with. I even rewatched Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner and his terrible accent just to see him. I think I first saw Heathers when I was about 13 at a sleepover, and that was it. I used to watch it almost every night. I had it on video. Luckily, I don't think my mom and dad ever saw it, because I don't think they'd have let me buy it if they had. I've still got it on the original DVD, and I bought it on Blu-ray a couple years ago too. It's such a good satirical and very, very dark take on the high school coming-of-age films that were doing the rounds at the same time, and how people will do anything to be accepted by the popular kids. I always think the whole film is slightly dreamlike, like a Twilight Zone episode. Yeah,
it is a little dreamy. Yeah.
I broke this up into 3 parts so we could
take turns.
Yes, spread out.
Yeah. Sure.
Jolene's excellent feedback. She went on to say there's parts of it, including the dream scene, where you're not sure if it's real or not. There you go, Jason. That's a common theme.
I thought it was real.
Yeah. It's just so well made. I don't want to go on for ages because I'm sure you'll cover most of it, but just a couple of my favorite moments. So JD arriving on his motorbike totally blew my adolescent mind. That's true. He was pretty attractive staring down the bullies, but then not doing anything. Veronica meeting JD's dad for the first time and them speaking for each other. His dad is definitely the monster behind the monster. That line about his mom waving to him from the window of the library and the look his dad gives him and the little mind blown emoji. Yeah, it is weird how they keep referring to each other as son or dad, and
it's so weird and creepy.
As if it's very creepy. And she said, the dream scene that is so well done, you don't realize it's a dream straight away. I've got a meaningfully marked up Moby Dick. What more does a suicide need? Now, if you'll excuse me. It's true. And the funeral part of the dream with the 3D glasses and Heather Chandler turning up. God, Veronica, my afterlife is so boring. If I have to sing Kumbaya one more time. That is funny.
The chase scene through the woods when Veronica realizes JD meant to kill them, and the diary entry afterwards. Dear diary, my teen angst bullshit has a body count. The ending. Line. Heather, my love, there's a new sheriff in town before leaving with Martha. I just love it. I'll shut up now before I write something that'll take you about 20 minutes to read out. I'm just going to finish on the best line in the film that I used to say all the time, thinking I sounded dead cool. Laugh, cry emoji. Today was great. Chaos is great. Chaos is what killed the dinosaurs, darling. Just a bit extra to include a Buffy link that I couldn't fit in anywhere else. Christian Slater's first wife is now married to Mark Blucas. Apologies if you mentioned that already. Mark Blucas plays Riley, who will be joining the cast in season 4.
It's interesting.
And then, because I associate this movie so deeply with Generation X, I posted a request for feedback on one of my college's alumni groups, specifically the one that is called Generation X Alums. And I said hey, do any of you guys want to comment and I'll read it out on my podcast? And we got some comments and they're pretty cool. So
that's cool.
Jason, want to read the first one from Angela?
Yeah. I just want to mention because Jolene had some great lines, and I had a whole thing on snappy dialogue, but we were going a little long, so I didn't read every line that I thought was clever. There's too many anyway. But I do want to read my favorite one, which is when after the 2 guys died in the forest, the principal said, I've seen a lot of bullshit, angel dust, switchblades, sexually perverse photography exhibits involving tennis rackets, but this suicide thing, that's a little TMI there, buddy.
Tennis racket.
So good. Yeah, that's a good
felt like
point.
It come from Naked Gun movie or something.
God, there are so many excellent little bits of dialogue sprinkled throughout this movie, and the more you watch it, I feel like every time I watch it, I find something new. I love Veronica during her speech. I'll only read one too. During her speech where she's talking to her parents and she's like, all we want is to be treated like human beings, not to be experimented on like guinea pigs or patronized like bunny rabbits. And she storms out and the dad turns to her mom and just goes, I don't patronize bunny rabbits.
Yeah.
It's just that's what you took from that.
You kind of missed
that
the
is
point.
Actually, I like that one even more. That's my favorite one.
Funny.
He seemed very offended.
The writing is just, so good.
Do you got one you want to read too?
Yeah, might as well, Penny.
There are so many great moments, but I think one of my favorites, and because I have a clip of it, I'm going to just play it.
Heather, why can't you just be a friend? Why are you such a mega bitch?
Because I can be.
I have said that to so many people.
That's like the antithesis again of Breakfast Club, where one character, I think Ali Sheedy, why are you being so nice to me? And Molly Ringwald says, because you're letting me.
Yeah. I do like that.
Okay. Man. Back to our regularly scheduled Vassar messages. This is from Angela, who said, I watched that movie a few weeks ago for the first time in a long time. I saw it in the movie theater when it was released in spring 1989. It's interesting to watch it now as a 52-year-old versus when I was 18. I was saddened to hear that Kim Walker, Heather number 1, passed away in 2001 from cancer. She was Jennifer Aniston's high school best friend. Also, I don't think this movie would be accepted if it were released today. Yeah, we agree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Next up, Melissa, in reply to Angela, said, that's a good point. This movie came out before any of those mass school shootings we see today. It's haunting to watch now. That is true, because that scene, especially with, JD in the cafeteria pulling out that gun, is a little more jarring after...
So many school shootings.
It is.
Yep.
Whitney says, my, parentheses, older, still Gen X, close parentheses, sister got a new red car a year or two ago and named her Heather. She has a red scrunchie on the shifter, and she sent she included a picture, funny. And it's fantastic.
I love that.
I'm red. Ezra said, a few years back, my daughter and a friend of hers dressed up as Veronica and JD for Halloween. It was interesting to see that the movie was still relevant to current teenagers. Nice. Yeah, I'm surprised.
They sound like very cool teenagers to me.
They would be with Ezra as a dad.
Nice. And then finally, Lori said it was screened at Vassar on my 21st birthday. That's cool. I went by myself because everyone was planning my surprise party for after a show at the, how do you say that, Penny? Aula?
Aula. Yeah, that was a dance club on campus.
Oh, that's cool. I love that it was screened at Vassar.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
That's cool. No wonder Fred Phelps and the Westboro Baptist Church hate you guys.
Yeah, screw Westboro Baptist Church.
Amen.
And we got a voicemail from my friend Karen, speaking of Vassar alums. Here she is.
Hi, Penny and Kara. This is Penny's friend Karen. I am hopefully going to get this in time for your Heather's podcast. I'm gonna not go over probably a lot of the things you guys are gonna talk about, the bad boy and what high school looked like in the 80s. Like Penny, I was still in high school when this movie came out. There are a lot of things that very much ring true. We don't talk about gay people and lots of other issues in there. But I think the perspective I want to do is I am actually I do research in suicide prevention, and I just wanted to speak to just like how horrible the school's reaction is to this spate of apparent suicides. There are lots of big don't do now. The first is we say someone died by suicide, not committed suicide. It takes the stigma off of it being, something you really had control over, which most times you really don't. You really wouldn't be passing a suicide note around a classroom. You would not be sharing details of the coroner's report. That was just so crazy to me that they said they did that. And then having this whole, we're going to share our emotions, and it's like, you have to do that in reaction in what we call a postvention after a suicide. You want to have outlets for people to talk about things, but not in a large group setting, because it becomes, uncontrollable. Really, you want to say there are counselors at the ready. We can talk about this in small groups. We want to reach out. Here are the resources available to people, if you're having troubled times. And then you want to come up with ways for people to feel comfortable talking to adults about mental health issues. You want to really just make the environment a little bit more friendly for those sort of communications, and talk about things that help keep you strong. And this is, really what a lot of suicide prevention programs are trying to do, is work on school climate and work on, if I'm going through a hard time, what can I do to make myself feel better? Who can I talk to? What are the kinds of things that just, can help you keep you strong? And what resources are there for when it gets really bad? And, they just so do it all wrong, at the school, which is, part of the point in the movie. But I thought it was important to sort of talk about this and how sort of that suicide postvention has changed from the 80s to current times. And yes, schools are still going to do it wrong. And I feel really bad for the counselor who gets called the hippy dippy, nonsense, get a job. But in a sense, she's on the right track. But the adults in this just are not seeing the realities of what is going on in that school, which is what makes it kind of a dark comedy. And I've always enjoyed this movie even though it's so dark, and Christian Slater is so perfect in this role. Like, you know, he is the ultimate bad boy, and I love that. And the fact that they make him actually bad, you know, he is not redeemed, is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to stop now, and I hope this makes it into your podcast. All right, bye.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah.
I was hoping you would call in with something like that because I know
great.
what kind of work you're in. I just wanted to add that teenage suicide is a growing problem in the United States. Between 2000, this is per the American Psychiatric Association, between 2000 and 2018, the suicide rate among youth ages 10 to 24 rose from 6.8 per 100,000 to 10.7 per 100,000. It's a 36% increase. This pushed suicide into the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 14 in 2021. Of course, it's not surprising that this change more drastically affects students of color, teenagers of color, and the LGBTQ community. The increasing number of students have been reporting, per the CDC, persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness in 2021, including 57% of girls, up 36%, 29% of boys, and 69% of LGBTQ plus students.
Wait, what were those percentages?
That's how many students reported feelings of sadness or hopelessness.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I always wonder how much social media and the internet has to do with all that.
A lot. And also, I read something just today, an article about how the U.S. has slipped out of the top 20 happiest countries in the world. Because
I saw that too.
Generation Z sees their future as doomed.
Yeah.
So
Finland is the best, is the top.
Yeah, Finland.
Well, I'm glad you called in, Karen, because it, for one, reminded me that I meant to say that if anyone hearing us is having suicidal thoughts or know of someone who is, you can call 988 for help if you're in the U.S. And I looked up international suicide hotlines. So if you just Google Suicide Hotline International, you'll find stuff, but there's a page of numbers at opencounseling.com for different countries. So I hope anyone out there that's having any feelings like that gets some help, you know, be good to at least
we'll put that
give it a
link
shot.
in the show notes.
Great, yeah.
Thanks, Jason. All right. We've come to the end of our show.
Remember, if you'd like to join the conversation, you can find all our contact information at podcastica.com, or you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/podcastica, or Instagram at stillslayingcast. And you can send email or a recorded message to stillslayingfeedback@gmail.com.
Also, while you're at podcastica.com, you can find all of this contact information and links to other social media pages and all of the other Podcastica shows. There are so many great Podcastica podcasts that you can watch. We mentioned earlier Mike Flanagan, who has created so many amazing series for Netflix and is now moving over to Amazon Prime. And he's going to be creating series there. And our podcast, Strange Indeed, has covered all of the Mike Flanagan shows that were on Netflix, and the coverage is amazing. The shows are amazing. I really recommend watching them and listening to the podcast as a companion. You get so much out of it because they dig into the background of everything, and they tell you all the references that you missed, and it's really fantastic.
And if you like Heathers and Buffy, I think you'll probably like it because they're about the supernatural things. They're dark, you know, they're well crafted with great characters, and the dialogue is snappy, and it's just really good stuff.
Very true. It's also the same way you could plug Yellow Jackets. It's got pretty much everything. Dark, very dark themes, a little hint of supernatural, and teenage girls. And power dynamics.
Yeah.
And I will say, for those, if we did not make it clear, for those of you who are new to Podcastica, it is a network that was started by Jason, and it originally started it all with the Walking Dead cast, and right now they're covering The Ones Who Live, and I cannot stop listening. I just recently listened to the most recent feedback episode, and you and Lucy almost seem re-energized with this one. It's been really fun to listen to you cover it. And I will say, I don't think I told you this, Jason, but after we talked about, what we were looking forward to in 2024, you talked about the upcoming season of Cobra Kai, and it sounded really interesting to me. So I've been going back and listening to all of y'all's coverage of Cobra Kai so I can catch myself up and enjoy the new season.
Great.
It's been
awesome.
Really fun.
That show may be my favorite show to podcast on. It's so weird that
you can tell, like, it comes through how much you like talking about that show.
I really do. And The Ones Who Live, if you dropped off The Walking Dead, come back. It's Rick Grimes, and he's in top form.
Yeah. This most recent episode was fantastic.
Yeah. It destroyed me a smidge.
Denai Guerrero wrote it, and she knocked it out of the park.
And of course, if you like what we do, hit like, follow, and subscribe. Leave us a 5-star rating if you're so inclined. We always appreciate that. And next time, we'll be joined again by Jason and Steve to cover Season 3, Episode 13 of Buffy, the Zeppo. I'm excited for that one.
I'm really looking forward to it. I recently rewatched it, and I had forgotten, again, a bunch of really great stuff that happens in the episode, and I think it's going to be really fun to talk about it. And it's an experiment with Jason because he's only ever seen like a couple of episodes of Buffy, and so we're just going to sort of drop him into the Zeppo and see how it goes. It's going to be kind of fun.
Yeah.
I'll do no research or anything, right?
Yeah,
just come in totally blank.
Yep, that's perfect.
Right.
All right, so until next time, I'm Penny.
And I'm Jason.
And I'm Kara. Thanks for listening, everyone, and...
It's your turn, Heather.
No, Heather, it's Heather's turn. Heather?
Oh, sorry, Heather.
Keep slaying!